I'm guessing we're live because my preview screen in here shows like a Talk Heathen logo instead of the show. But welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. It's March 22nd, 2020. We started a couple minutes late because we've got technical hiccups. We've been doing a lot of stuff here, and including getting electricians in to rewire stuff and change out lights and remove background stuff and make more room in here, and now there's less wires and less clutters. But welcome. I'm Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, Shane Isgrig, who you may know from Atheist Vanguard and oodles and gobs of other atheist stuff.
Yeah, do all kinds of activism with and without the ACA. So anyone who's seen Atheist Vanguard might recognize me. Go out and do street epistemology, break down the interviews after the show. All kinds of stuff. Been on Truth Wanted, so happy to finally be on Atheist Experience. Yeah,
a couple quick announcements and everything else. Evidently, somebody in chat said I wasn't real. I just found out. So Shane can kind of vouch for the fact that I'm real, but since you're watching this on your screen, maybe neither one of us are real. We are computer generated.
Depends on what you mean by real. I don't mean to Jordan Peterson you on,
We're like
what do you mean by real? But I don't know. I think, if by real you just mean existing objectively in the world, I'm sure I believe that Matt exists.
Welcome to Post-Truth with Matt and Shane. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Throughout this ordeal.
I'm a grocery stalker, so I have been at the front lines of the shitstorm lately. But
yeah.
I got to tell you, I understand why you guys are stocking up on food. I really don't get the toilet paper situation. I understand the people who are getting like a month worth of toilet paper, but it's how many people are getting so much more than that. I have no idea why you're doing that, but
yeah,
it's kind of crazy. But we recently changed our hours, so at least now when I work, there aren't any customers in the store, so that's convenient.
Just get some cloth diapers, wash a machine, take a shower, order a bidet. I don't know if Amazon.com, Amazon has changed their shipping stuff, so it's, hard to say exactly what you can and can't get shipped and how quickly you can get it shipped. But we at the ACA are taking all reasonable precautions right now, and this may be the last episode of Atheist Experience where there are two people here in studio. We decided this week that Shane and I would be here separated by some air and washing our hands and other stuff. The only other people in the building, there's no studio audience this week. It's just the guys on the other side of that wall.
Yeah, less than 10 people in the building. So, meeting the legal requirements, you can't have up to 10 people. So
we've changed the layout in there as well. And, everything is back up and working. So huge kudos to Vern and the electricians and all that. Yesterday was the Austin Atheist Day celebration, and it was supposed to take place on the steps of the Capitol. But we canceled our event there even before the Capitol shut down, and we switched to an online format. So once Atheist Experience is done for the day, we'll be playing the 2-hour collected clips of that. And also, that video is already up. It went live yesterday at noon on a sister channel, and Mark has a link up for that channel as well. It's basically the Atheist Community of Austin speaker series. So it's youtube.com/atheist community of Austin is the primary channel. Any of you who have already liked and subscribed to Atheist Experience, you can go there and like and subscribe to that, and you will get the videos from the speaker series as well. But we're going to air it kind of as a special thing afterwards, because I do a quick introduction there, which will explain what happened. But we also have Mandisa Thomas and Seth Andrews and Aaron Raw, and I gave a talk, but also Jen and V and Dan and Christy and Charlie and Daryl and who am I going to forget? Thomas, Westbrook, and Eric. And so I think I got all of them, but it's like all of them. 2 hours of little short speeches between a couple of minutes and maybe 15 minutes each. And so you get thoughts from each one of us about, why Atheist Day is important, what goals and missions we're actually working for.
I'm glad that you both still did Atheist Day and you made the adjustments before there was actually a ban in place on large gatherings. I'm glad that the ACA took it upon itself to say, we're not going to be a part of getting people to gather right now. And,
ACA is currently at DEF CON 3. DEFCON 2, we go down to nobody's allowed in the building except the crew, and all hosts will be remote. And at DEFCON 1, we just stop producing content. We're hoping we don't get there, but watching what's happening, and I'm optimistic that maybe we're getting ready to turn a corner on testing and treatment. I've been pretty much self-quarantined at my house for the last week.
Yeah, I was actually going to leave the country for my first time and go to Europe. My trip would have been 2 days from now. That, for obvious reasons, has been canceled. But I already got that time approved off of work, so I figure might as well kind of quarantine while I can,
Sure.
do what I can to slow that curve. Because a lot of people are misunderstanding that the biggest reason why we're trying to flatten the curve is just because something like 80% of us, and I don't have the exact number, but a large number of people are going to end up getting the virus. And it's important that we don't all get it at the same time, because that would overwhelm our healthcare system. And We're already kind of starting to see that in New York. It looks like they're starting to make arrangements for temporary hospitals. And, we have to come up with plans on how we're going to get more ventilators and all of that stuff. So do what you can to just slow down. You might get it, but try not to get it at the same time as everyone else.
Yeah. And I've been playing Doom Eternal, which came out on the 20th, streaming that. So for those people who aren't aware, I guess maybe I never mention it here, but I stream live on Twitch, and I've had a Twitch channel for 5 years, and every day somebody new comes in and goes, "Holy crap, it's Matt Dillahunty streaming games, and I didn't know you were a gamer." Yes, I'm a gamer. I was at QuakeCon 97. I ran the #1 Counter-Strike team in the United States. I am a hardcore gamer of both first-person shooters and ARPGs and some platformers, but also board games and dex games. I fucking love games.
Yeah.
And I will play the hell out of them. And so quarantine's a really good opportunity. I think I streamed Doom Eternal for about 7 hours yesterday, which is a middle-of-the-road stream for me. I've done 24-hour streams. I've done 2-hour streams. Yeah.
I mean, apart from activism, video games is mainly what you do anyway, right? So this isn't entirely different for you, your lifestyle. I'm going to go do what you always
record a couple of videos and then go back in the room and stream some Doom.
Yeah, so that works out.
It's business as usual, apart from, not getting to hang out with as many of my friends.
Right. That's been the harder part for me, is just wanting to have large gatherings and just kind of thinking, if I don't have a really good reason to go see somebody, then I shouldn't go do it. Because one of the problems with this COVID-19 is you're asymptomatic for a while after you get it. So you could have it and not know it.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest problems. So
I also shared a post today because Rand Paul has now tested positive.
He's tested positive.
And I made a post on Facebook saying, irony, it's what's for breakfast. And I don't want anybody to think that I am gleeful in any way that Rand Paul or anyone else is infected. That's not remotely the case. I'm sorry that anybody got affected, and I don't, bear any work. It's oh, no, that's justice. Screw you, Rand Paul. No. The irony of it was that there was legislation that was going to be voted on specifically to start addressing this and move funds around. And he basically held our healthcare hostage by attaching an amendment which included things like pulling us out of Afghanistan, things that weren't even relevant to the thing. It's let me get my pet issues in at the expense of other people's health.
Right.
And he got tested because he's in the Senate. He has access to a test that other people don't have access to yet. He didn't have any symptoms. It was just a precautionary test, whereas I have a friend who has a friend who has symptoms and is sick with a fever, cough, everything else, and cannot get tested. And because they talked to somebody else, those people now don't know if they've been exposed or not.
Right. I would like to see an increase in the availability of tests.
Yeah.
Because
Rand Paul's asymptomatic, or he isn't symptomatic yet, but he's in a higher risk category for having, severe response to all this. But yeah,
here's what I would leave in my comment in regards to some people saying that it's justice or not. If I believed in karma, this would strengthen my belief.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. Except I don't.
Right.
So you ready to move on to some calls?
Let's do it.
All right. We got Dean in North Carolina. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. Good to talk with you, Matt. And what's the other gentleman's name? Shane?
Shane, yeah.
Good to talk to you too.
It says here what the call screen has written down is you say manuscript evidence for the New Testament like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Why is it not accurate?
Yeah. So my point is, what I often hear is that we have copies of a copy of a copy from someone we don't know who's got a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And my question is, why do you think that the transmission of the New Testament is not accurate?
When did I say it wasn't accurate? What I'm saying is, what I'm saying is that because we don't have originals, you can't say with any strong confidence how accurate it is to the original. Meanwhile, the Dead Sea Scrolls are irrelevant when you're talking about the New Testament. So I don't know why. I mean, you're aware that there aren't New Testament documents in the Dead Sea Scrolls, right?
No, I understand that. I was just giving the call screener a synopsis of saying, okay, I'm talking about the accuracy of manuscript evidence like the Dead Sea Scrolls as an example, not that the Dead Sea Scrolls are the exact conversation I want to have.
Is it that you're comparing the fact that people look at these scrolls and use them to account for the past, and you're saying that, like, if we can do that with the Dead Sea Scrolls, why don't we do that with the New Testament? Is that what you're asking?
No, I was just using an example to the call screener. What I'm asking is, what the question I'm asking is, why would someone say, for instance, that, like Bart Ehrman, for instance, Bart Ehrman would say, you can't know what the New Testament actually says because they are riddled with manuscript errors. My question is twofold. Would you say that that's the case? And two, if you say that that's the case, why would you believe that they aren't accurate?
Well, for starters, okay, so you're familiar with the telephone game, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So are you aware, and if I'm wrong about this, I'd like to be corrected, but are you aware that the first writings about Jesus were, the first writings of the New Testament were 50 years after he had already died? So, like, they were using oral traditions to tell the story for 50 years. Are you aware of that?
Yeah.
So for 50 years, nothing was written down. Everyone was just repeating the story. And you've said you know the telephone game. Would you agree with me that if we play the telephone game, the story is likely to get changed?
I would say in the modern way that we play the telephone game,
but not in the
designed. The game is designed. Okay, go ahead.
It's not a game. Okay. Are you suggesting that communication between humans in the past was somehow more likely to be accurate on details than modern humans?
No, what I'm saying is that the preservation of what was transmitted then is different than the way the telephone game is played. The telephone game is essentially a bad analogy.
Well, no, the point is, it's not. So analogy means two things are being compared due to their similarities. They're not saying these two things are identical. But here's the quick summation. First of all, I don't know that Bart Ehrman would say what you think he would say. I think he, like a lot of other New Testament scholars, who I'm going to agree with, would say that what we have as a translation in modern Bibles is probably pretty accurate in most significant respects to what the originals likely said. However, we don't know what the originals said because we don't have them. And even if they were completely accurate to the originals, that has no bearing on whether or not what is in them is true.
No, I agree with you there. My argument isn't necessarily the historicity of the document. I'm questioning why someone would say that they're not accurate. And
then you should talk to someone who has said that and ask them why they say that.
Yeah, well, I'm talking to Shane, and Shane's saying that, it's like it's similar to the telephone game.
It is.
And I've said, okay, so the telephone game, though, is designed for the message to be confused.
Right. It's designed to illustrate the flaw in what you're doing or what you're referring to. It's illustrating the flaw in that method. So that's the same method, but it's just when we play the telephone game, we do it to illustrate that.
Yeah. A telephone game is a way to put a punctuation mark or shine a spotlight on problems in our communication. If you take 10 people who were at Woodstock and ask them to describe what happened, how much variation is there going to be in their story?
Oh, I don't know.
Well,
Right.
it was 50 years ago.
I mean, I was taught the telephone game when I was in elementary school. It was taught to me in school to demonstrate that this is an ineffective way to tell if something's true, if this is how it's been passed on.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand. So it seems like you're agreeing with my criticism of the telephone game, but you're saying that this is different from that.
Yeah, I would say that the telephone game, the way that it is set up, that is inherently flawed because it's designed for the message.
Okay, so explain because we agree that it's flawed. Explain what the flaw is in that method.
Gotcha. Okay, so the flaw in the telephone game is that, one, once the message is said, the person who has received the message cannot go back and ask the person who gave them the message, hey, could you clarify this, that, or the other?
And you don't think that happens in reality?
No, it's not about what happens in reality. It's about
that's the only thing that matters is what happens in reality.
Right. I'm trying to see the difference in a scenario where people are playing the telephone game and the first 50 years of this story being passed down. Like, I'm trying to see what the difference is to you, because it's the same method of people just repeating the story. And it doesn't, like, people don't have to be intentionally dishonest. Matt can tell me something and I can repeat it back to you. And if I misunderstood him, then I'm going to tell you something wrong, or he was wrong in the first place. But
so I also think that there would be a difference. Let me finish the first point with the transmission, and then we'll talk about what you said.
Go for it.
So the problem with the telephone game, as I said, the person that receives the message can't go back and check. The rule is you can't go back and check to the other person. You can't ask the person who said it before you, or the three people that passed the message before you,
right?
Hey, what did you say? Whereas with specifically the scribes copying down the manuscripts.
No. Can
you talk to the first person that relayed this story?
We're talking about before there were manuscripts.
Right. Can you talk? Because you're saying that the problem is you can't go back and talk to those people, and you're arguing for an example where that's exactly the case. No. You can't go back and talk to those people.
I'm simply talking about first the transmission of the scribes. Now, what you said is, all right, the people that originally talked about these types of stories in the New Testament. Now, the difference, I would say, is the difference between that and our culture is that given the roots of Christianity, there was a culture that was orally based. And what I mean by that is, by the age of 12, the Jewish men, or the teenagers, as we would call them today, were to memorize the Torah by heart, right? They could do that. So what you have in the preservation of these stories is you have a group of people who are already committed to being able to memorize large chunks of story.
Okay, so you are making an argument. Yeah. This is specifically... No, stop. This is specifically what I asked about earlier, that you're saying... Okay. That there was something fundamentally different about the way human beings communicated in the past that made them more accurate with oral history. That's what I was asking about earlier.
And it seems like that something is that they did this more regularly, and you're talking about them using oral traditions more often. That's not because it was more effective. That's because they were illiterate. People who can't write are going to learn that way instead.
But you don't get to go back and appeal to what you think happened that may have preserved accuracy. You have to actually provide evidence that the accuracy was preserved, which you can't do, because here's the thing. If Jesus gets up there and stands and gives the Sermon on the Mount, then there's a bunch of people out there who can relay that information. What's the likelihood that a chunk of people are going to get it word for word?
Gotcha. Well, it's not a chunk of people. The closest people...
What's the likelihood that any one person standing there listening to the Sermon on the Mount is going to get it word for word right?
Oh, I don't know.
I do.
Depends on how many times Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount.
How many times?
He didn't give it just once.
No, the question.
Yes, he did give it just once. That's why it's called the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, but he could preach that sermon multiple times, Matt, obviously.
You have no evidence of that. That's just a bullshit pulled out of your butt.
It's not.
It is.
It's not.
It's
what rabbis did in the first century, Matt.
That doesn't make it accurate. To the fact that that's what they did, it's...
Well, Matt's saying that they only did it once, and I'm...
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm fucking not.
He said
Stop.
Jesus gave the sermon once.
I said you can't...
You're not gonna, listen, Matt, I respect you, dude. You're not going to cuss at me. If you need to hang up, you need to hang up. Because you're not going to cuss at me like that.
I will fucking cuss at whoever the fuck I want. And if you don't fucking like it, you can fucking hang up. How's that?
Well, it sounds grand, but this is too important for me to just hang up because you've got a potty mouth.
So because you are worried about whether or not I use words that you like, you want me to hang up on you, but you won't hang up.
It's just a matter of respect.
Well,
so you're the one that
to hang up.
I'm. It's a matter of respect here in that I'm trying to get to the point of something, and point out where the flaw is. And you're sitting here just pulling stuff out of your butt saying, well, he could have given that sermon. You are. If you interrupt me again, I'm going to put you on hold. And then you're on hold now, and I will fucking curse at you as much as I fucking want while you stay on hold and fucking listen to it. I don't know why you're so worried about fucking words being problematic and saying I have a potty mouth. You know what I don't have? I don't have a brain that is going to make up excuses when the argument that I present is not rational. All I'm saying is that you want to claim, well, maybe Jesus gave this sermon many times, okay? But if you have an audience, what is the likelihood that someone is going to get it word for word correct? Pretty low. That happens all the time. You can't even probably, well, as is evidenced by the conversation, you can't even relay back to me what I said word for word or even get the actual encapsulated issue correctly. Because my issue is that you have no way to demonstrate that Jesus did, in fact, give the Sermon on the Mount multiple times. At most, you can come up with it as an ad hoc explanation for one possibility, which you cannot demonstrate. All you can do is say, hey, traveling rabbis may have given sermons many times over. And maybe Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount many times over. But there are other events within this narrative in the Bible, which are single event occurrences, not multiple events. It's not like here's a sermon that could have been given multiple times. You are busy coming up with whatever excuse you can, just out of thin air. Every time I say, hey, what's the likelihood that somebody gave a sermon and people got it word for word right? Well, they didn't just have to give it once. How do you know? How do you know that it wasn't given just once? You have no way of demonstrating that. We have no original manuscripts. So you want to look at how likely it was that they copied it accurately. And I've already conceded, as would many New Testament scholars, that they very likely copied it accurately and not 100% accurately. We know there are variations in manuscripts. We can look at that. There's actual evidence. And Shane brought up that the first writings were anywhere from 30 to 50 years afterwards, or at least decades afterwards, and wanted to talk about that oral history and how it was transferred, which is why I asked you a question about, are you appealing to people being different back then? And you said no. And then what did you do? You appealed to people being different back then. Oh, well, they had to learn this stuff. None of this gets to what was actually originally said. You have no way of demonstrating it. And here's the rub. If, in fact, anything about the story is true, or the key elements of the story is true, then there is a God who has an important message for humankind and chooses to reveal it in such a way that future generations cannot be confident that it is accurate and instead have to come up with post hoc rationalizations and bullshit claims about, oh, well, maybe it was this, well, maybe it was this, well, maybe it was this. Why can't God, the governor of the universe, the creator of everything, the all-powerful, all-knowing being, communicate in a way where you and I would never have to have a conversation about how accurate is this book to the original?
Okay, so which part of that diatribe do you want me to address?
I don't know.
Just pick one.
So it's not. I would reject the notion that I'm simply pulling this possibility out of thin air, given that even New Testament scholars like Bart Ehrman, like Craig Evans, like Mike Licona, who you've debated, Matt.
Yes, I've debated Mike Licona, and Mike Licona stood up and talked about Ouija boards and trash can lids in a debate about the resurrection. Don't reference him as if he's some icon of reasoned argument, because he's not. It was garbage.
Okay, but New Testament scholars would certainly agree that as you look into the history of the time of the first century and the process of which itinerant rabbi preachers operated, that they simply didn't give one sermon one time. It was kind of like a stump speech, right? So you have candidates that go around from place to place. They give the same.
You are completely
same thing takes place.
No, sorry, you're on hold again. Let me try to be more clear. I'm not saying it didn't. It isn't. I'm not saying Jesus didn't give this speech more than once. I'm saying you have no way to show that he did give it more than once. And that means that it is a post hoc thing. You can say, hey, it could have been like a stump speech. Okay, it could have been. How do you demonstrate that it was? Because until you can demonstrate that it was, you don't get to use that to claim that what we have is accurate.
Okay, so in appealing to the historical context and the historical probability that's what happened, you would say that that's not enough to posit that it's probably true that Jesus gave these sermons more than once.
Correct.
Is that a fair question?
Correct.
Okay.
And by the way, as I pointed out in the diatribe, the part that you skipped right over to address the part that you thought you could, there are single instance events. The wedding at Cana. That he didn't do the wedding at Cana multiple times, did he? Was he a wedding magician?
No.
Okay. So the facts of that being reported.
His speeches. We're talking about his speeches is what we were talking about.
So
you mentioned,
if you pull up a red letter Bible, how many of those do you think are something that he gave multiple times?
If I pulled up a red letter Bible, as far as the speech sections, I would say he probably gave a Sermon on the Mount at least more than one.
Oh my God, it's like your brain will not let you address the question that you're asked. If you pull up a red letter Bible, for those who aren't familiar, a red letter Bible is one, when you go through the New Testament, highlights the words that are supposedly actually spoken by Jesus in red. What percentage of those red letters, which are supposedly direct quotes, are parts of speeches that you think he gave multiple times?
I would say that the multiple occasions are those in which he takes place either like Sermon on the Mount, hillside gatherings. I would say instances where he is cleansing the temple.
Dean, are you capable of listening to a question and answering the question you were asked? Because you're not.
Yeah, I actually am.
No, you actually fucking aren't. I'm saying.
It's a compliment there too.
What percentage of red letter words attributed to Jesus do you think are part of speeches that he gave multiple times? That's what I said. Not which speeches. What percentage of the red letter?
Well, you would have to pare that down because each section of the red letter takes place in a different context.
Jesus fucking Christ.
I'm just being straight. That's how you.
No, you're not being straight. This is a simple question that allows the conversation to move forward instead of putting up the roadblocks and hand waving that you're doing.
I'm not putting up the roadblocks.
Yes, you are. What percentage of red letters in the New Testament would you estimate are part of speeches that Jesus gave multiple times?
I don't know because of the.
You should go learn.
The speeches took place.
But you got an honest answer at the end there. So going to give credit where credit's due.
Sometimes
the correct answer is I don't know. And when you don't come in acting like you do. That's all I'm saying.
Well, it's not an issue of not being able to know. It's an issue of what's the context of the speech being given.
No, it's not.
That's the point. Okay. So
it's not. If you acknowledge that, let's say you think 10% is something that are single occurrence events, at least you would have given me a number of what your estimate was. And then I would have said, okay, that means 10% of what is red letter was a single occurrence, which does not fit your preferred model of transition for accuracy. And so what likelihood is there that that portion, that 10% portion, is accurate? And then we would have had to acknowledge that we can't be particularly confident in that 10%. I think it's much more, I think it's overwhelmingly single instance things. We're talking about a biography of someone's purported life. And even if you know, this is why if you go to the Sermon on the Mount and you want to claim that, oh, he gave this sermon multiple times, well, you don't have any evidence for that. But even if I grant you that, that does not tell us how accurate it is. Because there are politicians now that can run around and give stump speeches and people don't give it accurate. And literally in this conversation, I have been asking very specific questions which you have failed to even approach an answer that would be consistent with the question. So either you're not listening, I am the world's worst communicator, or there's something else going on that shows that when you listen to something, even if I repeat it, that does not necessarily mean that you're going to get it correct.
Okay, so in this conversation, the only thing that I've tried to lay out is the following. One, that the New Testament has been accurately transmitted. That doesn't mean that what's in it is historical. Second, I'm simply saying with regards to Shane's objection with the 50-year gap, that these things could have been preserved through oral tradition, given the nature of the culture of that time. That's when we got off into Jesus' stump speech or whatnot.
And that's when you started saying that it was somehow more effective for them to use the same method. You were saying it was people doing the same thing. You're just saying they were better at it back then. And that's why Matt asked you, do you think there was something different in the way people were communicating to one another verbally at that time than they are now?
It's also
that's where oral tradition.
No, it's also flawed. This is the thing. When you make those appeals to oral tradition, when you talk about by the age of 12 there were young Jews who knew the Torah verbatim, that's because the Torah was written down and they spent time in school learning it verbatim, or in temple learning it verbatim. That is not the same as hearing a speech and getting it right, or even hearing it multiple times. Because even if Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount multiple times, that doesn't mean that there was somebody necessarily there who was going to hear it multiple times. And it's not the same as, here it is written down, let me read it to you, let me go through this. Even if you're illiterate, I will teach you this. We'll go through it until you can recite it. Teaching someone by going through something that's written down until they can give it back to you verbatim is fundamentally different from, I'm going to give my speech a few times and hope that you guys manage to get it correct.
And I'm sorry to have to point this out, but this I think is going to help illustrate my point. You're familiar with the verse Exodus 20:13, right? I mean, if you don't know which one, okay, yeah, thou shalt not kill in the King James Version. Okay.
Right.
Do you know what it says in the New King James Version? Same verse.
Murder.
Right, it says you shall not murder. So let's stop and think about that. Do the word kill and the word murder mean the same thing?
No, they don't.
Right. So one of them could be wrong, because one of them is saying don't kill, which is don't kill under any circumstance, self-defense, go to war, etc. But then the other one says you shall not murder. Well, murder is just the unlawful, or some would argue the unjustified killing of another person by another. So we're reading the same book in the same language, but two different translations in the same language, you get a different meaning from the same verse.
No, I think that what you're bringing up as far as biblical translations is a valid objection.
Okay, yes. Well, thank you. What I'm saying is that objection applies even more so when it's not being written down.
Because at least when we look at the different English translations, like Shane's got one that says kill, I've got one that says murder. How do we resolve what is likely to be the original intent? Well, we would go back and look at the original Hebrew that it was written in, and look at Hebrew dictionaries and talk to experts in the Hebrew language. And the best they can do right now is give us what modern Hebrew, how that would be interpreted, and what they believe was probably intended in ancient Hebrew.
Yeah, do some research on the love thy neighbor, on the Hebrew meaning of that.
But they can go back to this and say, look, in the oldest and best manuscripts that we have, given what we understand about the time, this almost certainly meant murder as opposed to kill. Mm-hmm. But that is a pathway to resolving a potential conflict to get to what the original meaning probably meant that all of us are fine with. That does not exist when you don't have the originals, when you have that gap where they're telling stories. And this is why you and others are going to say, well, maybe he gave the Sermon on the Mount many, many times, and that increases the likelihood that somebody got it right. That is a post hoc rationalization that we don't have evidence for. I'm not saying it's impossible that it happened. I'm saying that this is presented in the Bible contextually, and I'll go back and do more research on this as well, but it's presented as a one-time incident. There's no indication in the Bible that Jesus gave this sermon multiple times. It is presented as a specific audience. Now, I can't show that he didn't give it multiple times, but we can be relatively confident that a good chunk of what's in there that supposedly came from him wasn't given multiple times. And the things that aren't in red letters aren't even supposed to be quotes. They're just people trying to portray the ideas as accurately as they can. And so at the end, as I noted earlier, I'm going to agree that even modern English translations of the Bible are probably mostly accurate to our best approximation of originals. However, we can't demonstrate where the inaccuracies might be, and it could be something as simple as a no that inverts a meaning, or it just might be something that's largely irrelevant. And none of that fucking matters, because what matters is it true? Because Muslims can point back and say, hey, we have a completely accurate copy of the Quran because we have essentially the originals, or we have, a shorter gap between the originals and the first written ones and less variation among our manuscripts. And so when they make that argument and the Muslims say, look, our holy book, we have far more confidence that it is more accurate to the original than anything available in Christianity or Judaism. Well, then the response to that is, yes, but your religion's newer or whatever else. But at the end of the day, the real question is the one I asked earlier. How does it make sense that there is a God who, knowing that these problems are going to happen, knowing that languages are going to change, knowing that languages are going to die out, knowing that the Muslims are going to come along with their false doctrine and claim that it's more accurate to the original, and that, you and I are going to be having a telephone conversation where, you're arguing for a point that I find absolutely irrelevant in the grander scheme. How is it that God doesn't fix this? That is the portion that is absolutely absurd. To think that there's a God that has an important message for everybody, and there's no guarantee that the message is right, that the message is from him, that he doesn't seem to do anything to clarify disagreements, which is why you end up with thousands upon thousands of different denominations, all within Christianity.
Right. So, no, I think that is a significant question that you raised, Matt, with regards to the preservation or the passing down of an important message. And I think that, one of the ways that it could potentially be answered, I'm not saying that this is the answer, but I don't know if it follows, and I'm not accusing you of saying this, but I don't know that it follows that just because you have a perfect God, that you would have to have something that has been preserved perfectly. It could just simply be preserved sufficiently for what we need. And with regards to the multiple denominations...
How can it be sufficient if people are getting it wrong? How can it be sufficient?
Right. So,
how can it be sufficient if Christians are debating soteriology?
And are you conceding that it's not the perfect word? That we don't have access to a perfect translation?
What's there is sufficient, but with regards to...
Sufficient but not perfect.
Variants and things like that, I'm saying that it could be preserved in a sufficient manner, even though people who copy it or people who, form multiple denominations, that might be imperfect.
But so, how can it be? How can it be sufficient if there's disagreement? Soteriology
Right.
Is the study of what one must do to be saved. That is not agreed upon among different Christian denominations. They will point to different parts of the book. So how could you possibly argue that the book is sufficient to its goal if the goal is salvation, if there is still disagreement among honest, well-intentioned Bible scholars about what the book's position is?
Right. So that has to do not necessarily with the book. That more has to do with the free will of the people who are seeking to that has to do with free will choices that man use when they come to the book. For instance, you could have somebody. But the Bible. Yes. You can sit and say no.
I'm saying no to try to get you to shut the fuck up so I can explain why this was wrong. God,
so free will.
If God,
with regards to somebody,
God cannot be.
What they're going to follow.
Okay, your ass is on hold again. You don't get to put the blame on humans because God is responsible for that as well. If God has a message and wants to convey it in a way that is sufficient instead of, accurate, which is what would be really nice, but is sufficient, you don't get to say the message is sufficient, but these human beings got it wrong because of their free will. If that's the case, then the message isn't sufficient because we're talking about well-intentioned, honest people who want to seek God and want to know what God wants to say about salvation. If that is the problem, you don't get to put the blame on the human beings and claim that God did something that is sufficient, because I could do something better than what God did that would actually convey what my thoughts are to every human being, and that might still be insufficient, but at least I could do that.
So essentially what you're saying then is people are not responsible for the free will actions that they take towards interpreting.
First of all,
that's not even in the fucking ballpark of what I just said.
That's completely separate from what he said. And you're also, I should point out that
that's what you said.
No, that is not
that's not what he said.
I'm gonna put your ass back on hold and let Shane explain to you what I said.
This is what he's going through, and I think I could help illustrate with an analogy. He was talking about why someone who wanted people to understand this would choose this method to do it. And I'd like to ask you a question, and I want you to just consider this analogy that I'm going to give you and give me your answer. If you were a teacher, you worked at a school, and one of the teachers, who this is your coworker, was teaching a class by selecting 4 students, maybe 5 students, giving them the lesson and telling them, you go teach the rest of the class. Would you criticize that teacher for using that method to teach algebra, or would you consider it equally as efficient as teaching the whole class? That's what Matt was trying to illustrate to you.
Okay, so then what you're saying then is it's not you can't lay the blame on the person for their use of free will.
It's not for the use of free will, no, because he's talking about us being flawed beings, but who made us flawed? Who made it the case that we couldn't fully understand this?
Right. So once again,
right. So it's not about free will. And I don't believe in free will, but I don't think that free will is in the same ballpark as what we're talking about here. We're talking about the ability to understand this message efficiently.
Even if, so let's play a hypothetical. God gives a perfect inerrant word. He also endows people with free will. Are there people that would take that book and manipulate the book so that they might gain certain authority?
Thanks for proving my point.
Okay, first of all, again, you're not addressing the question that's being asked. And I'll regardless of that, I'll answer your question. Yes, people probably would do that. However, that's not what we were talking about, and we're not going to change the subject to that. What we were talking about was this being the method used to understand it. You're saying God wants everyone to understand this. That's your belief, right? God wants everyone to accurately understand this. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, but he chose a way which is insufficient.
I would disagree that it's insufficient.
Okay, but you disagreed with my criticism of the telephone game, and you accurately answered when I asked you what was wrong with the telephone game. And what I'm saying is you got the answer right, but the answer applies to this too.
See, the question was, how can it possibly be sufficient if there are two honest, devout, sincere individuals who want to know what God thinks, who read the book and don't agree?
Because a person doesn't have to intentionally misinterpret it. Like, somebody doesn't have to intentionally say that the Bible says something it doesn't say, translate it inaccurately. A person can mean to do it honestly and make errors.
And if the tool for communication to those two individuals is ambiguous or subject to interpretation and misunderstandings among even honest people, how could you ever say that it is sufficient to the task that you set it to?
Well, you could set that it's sufficient to the task that it's set to, even if you had honest individuals
who disagree. You can't, because we've started with.
Is it just the
I swear I'll just drop you.
Just drop me then. Do what you got to do. I don't care.
I will, you little punk ass. But because I know you won't hang up, I'm going to put you on hold and make you listen. Now I own you. You're on hold. The purpose, as acknowledged, was for God to communicate to everyone. You already acknowledged that. Oh, he hung up. Sorry. You already acknowledged that the purpose was for God to communicate this message to everyone. Okay? That's step one. God wants to communicate to everyone. That is the task. The only way the message is sufficient to the task is if the message is clear enough that everyone can understand it. After that, you can get to willful disregard. You can get to willful changes. But you cannot take two people who, like, if Shane and I are studying a book on music theory, and we look at it, and we both really want to understand music theory, and we have the same text, and we look at it, and we come to two dramatically different understandings about it.
Which has happened with us with interpretations of the Bible. There are verses that we disagree on what they mean.
Yeah.
We're reading not only the same book, the same translation.
And so if that's the case, then you could say one of us is just not very bright or very wrong. But you can't say that it's an exercise of free will that one of us is intentionally trying not to understand it.
Right.
But if there's a God, and that God is capable of making both of us understand this correctly, and instead of taking the method that is sufficient to ensure an accurate understanding for each of us, instead uses a demonstrably inferior method such that we don't come to a correct understanding, it ain't our fault. If you write a book that's not good enough for the very thing that you're trying to teach, that's your fault. And if you make an argument that is insufficient to demonstrate your case, that's your fault.
And back to my teacher analogy, if a teacher gives a lesson and every student in the class gets a different interpretation of it, you blame the teacher.
Yeah.
So.
But the other thing about his analogy that's great, that fits in there, is, if you were to teach 4 of the students and have them instruct everybody else, that's a lazy fucking teacher.
Right.
That is somebody who's not doing their job. And if one of the, one of the 4 students taught another person and they understood it, cool. We're not saying you can't do that.
Right.
Maybe everybody in the class could understand, but it's clear that we have an issue where not even the 4 people necessarily agree, and the rest of the class doesn't come to the same understanding. And you're going to say, it's that class.
Yeah,
it's their free will.
And if they start killing each other over who got the right answer, then I think it's the teacher who should be held responsible.
Absolutely. So. All right. So that was a really long call, but we'll go on to Brent in California. Thanks for waiting.
Yes, sir. This is Brent in California.
Yeah, you're on with Matt and Shane.
Hi there. I'm a big fan. I have been for a very long time, over a decade. I've been looking forward to calling in. I'm curious to find out if there's anything that, in particular, Matt and I could disagree on.
Well, it says here you're a pantheist and you think the universe is conscious?
I think so, yes, sir.
Why?
because that's the way that it makes sense to me. If I were to put together everything,
Yeah,
that I
then
know
there's
of the
something we
universe-
could disagree on.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like the first thing you called in to talk about isn't something he would agree with.
What makes sense to you isn't relevant to what is.
I suppose you're correct. And I understand that you are an agnostic atheist.
Depending on definitions of knowledge, yeah.
I suppose the entire call could be cut very short by saying, agreed, so what? But I've never come up with anything that I could ever debate you with, Matt.
Well, if your goal was to just after 10 years call up with something to debate me on and you haven't come up with anything to debate me on, then just keep listening.
I could listen. Yes.
Cool. Because I'm not a pantheist. I don't see any reason to think the universe is conscious. I think parts of the universe are conscious. That's us. But there's nothing about the universe that gives me any sort of impression or evidence for a universal consciousness.
And I want to get on to asking you, why is it that you think the universe is conscious?
Because after putting together the pieces of what I do know of the universe, and then following that to its end, it led me to consciousness.
Okay, I'm going to have to get some clarity there, because there was
literally nothing of substance there. Shane asked you why you think the universe is conscious, and basically you said, I thought about it, and that's the conclusion.
You basically said, I had premises that led to a conclusion. Yeah. And I'm sitting here asking what all of them are. What are these premises, and what is this conclusion?
Yep.
Okay. Well, you understand as well as I do the fundamentals of physics and all the different laws of nature, physics.
I don't know if I understand them as well as you, or better than you, or less well.
I understand. Okay. If I were to use an analogy, if I were a caveman inventor, and I were to say, hey, I think that if I were to take some wheels and stick them on a big box and, find a way to make it roll on its own, the wheels to roll on its own, I think that I could make, a transport system. Now, I have no way of proving this or of doing it.
Whoa.
In my head.
Whoa.
Yes.
What do you mean you don't have any way of doing this? You already evidently know what wheels are and a box is. And so you are hypothesizing that you could make wheels, which you already know how they work. I mean, this is the problem. You're struggling to come up with an analogy, and you're doing it based on already knowing what the outcome is. But when you say you don't have any way to test this, why not?
Because I have no way of manipulating the universe itself in order to test that which
you don't have any way to put you don't have any way to put wheels on a box.
You don't have to manipulate the universe to do that.
Well, then I would expand.
How the fuck did we get cars? How did we get cars if we don't have that ability?
Let's say that the box is a car, and I'm a caveman. I have no way of extracting gasoline. I mean, I could figure it out just as.
Wow. Go ahead.
Just as I, as a person today, could figure out how to travel to the moon, I suppose.
It's like you have a good understanding, and you are putting up roadblocks because, hey, somebody thought, hey, this wheel thing or this round thing, it rolls. Look, we can do this, we can do this. Yeah. And then they build up and they get to this point where we have vehicles and we send somebody to the moon.
I mean, I was guessing by the beginning of where you were going that you were going to give me the teleological or the watchmaker argument. And it sounded like that's what you were doing.
Oh, no.
But then, then as you kept progressing, it got into something. I don't see what the gasoline part had to do with that. I'm lost. But
okay,
what is it?
I know what it is, and I'll make the prediction. He is desperate to come up with a scenario where he has a hypothesis that feels intuitively correct, but he cannot actually follow it through to test it. And yet he wants to be justified in reaching the conclusion without actually doing the test.
Does that sound relatively accurate to you?
You're asking me? It is possible, I suppose.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, do you think that maybe you're just trying to justify something that you want to believe in? Because it sounds like you don't seem to think that your justification is sound. Like, it seems like you're still trying to justify it.
I could see the argument. I don't have any motivation or reason to believe in what I believe, other than that's what makes sense to me. I don't believe in a heaven or hell.
I don't see why it makes sense to you that the universe is consciousness. Like, I still haven't gotten anything that leads me there, or like I'm still trying to understand how you arrived at that.
But just to put the final nail in your analogy, the time to believe that a gasoline-powered vehicle is a plausible means of transportation is after we've done the actual testing, not for a caveman. The fact that a caveman might think that, not that he knows what gasoline is or whatever else, but might see a wheel and hypothesize about what might be possible in the future, doesn't mean that he's justified in reaching that conclusion, because he also might look at a bird and conclude that we can then fly to another star in our lifetime.
Okay.
So how do we get to a universal conscious pantheism?
We both agree that there are certain parts of the universe that are conscious. You and I are good examples.
Sure.
I agree. Consciousness exists.
Would we also agree that there are certain parts of my body that aren't conscious?
As far as we know, yes.
Yeah. So like, for example, my fingernails, we have no reason to think they're conscious, right?
As far as we know, yes, sir.
Right. Living things are made up of dead things that somehow, a bunch of things that aren't alive make up things that are somehow alive.
Meanwhile, I have, for example, molecules in my body, like water molecules. We don't have any reason to think that they're conscious, right?
Correct.
As a matter of fact, we have good reason to think that water molecules are not conscious, correct?
Yes, sir.
So my body is now made up of things that are not conscious, and somehow or another, there is still consciousness produced by my body. So
correct.
The constituent parts of my body don't make any specific prediction about the whole with regard to consciousness.
Okay.
The fact that each individual neuron in my brain isn't itself conscious doesn't mean that consciousness
can't necessarily mean right.
Right.
Okay.
So this was a way of short circuiting where you seem to be going, which is there is consciousness within the universe. And I want to know how you get from seeing conscious entities in the universe to therefore the universe is conscious.
To put it all short, I guess I would have to say my own mental construct of how it's all put together. And, to go into detail would take a lot of time, and it still wouldn't be proof, of course. So, yeah, this is what I was afraid of when I calling in for 10 years. That's why I delayed it, because I was afraid that we would just come to a standstill like that.
Okay. Well, I'll see you in 2030.
Matt, I appreciate talking with you, sir.
Thanks. Got anybody you want to go to next?
Yeah, I'm interested.
We lost our slavery caller.
Yeah, I wanted to go to that one next, but since we lost that, Traci in Arkansas. Yeah. Hey, Traci, how's it going?
Hi, Shane. Hi, Matt.
Hi,
it's
Traci.
great to talk to you again, Matt.
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. I'm glad to see you guys are healthy in this crazy time.
So far, so good.
So far.
Right, let's keep it that way. And before I dive in, Matt, I've got to say, I'm a gamer too.
Mm-hmm.
So being told by my job to stay home and play video games until it blows over, that was a dream come true.
Wait, did your job actually tell you to stay home and play video games, or did they say work from home?
No, it legit. I work for a casino.
Oh. Okay. Well, you're playing games at work then.
Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Playing on the job.
Hey, well, oh, yeah, love it. Well, I've got an update for you. I am no longer a Christian.
Ah.
Yes,
and what
There
are you
people
now?
applauding.
Did you become a Scientologist?
Please tell us that.
No, I'm not religious at all.
Yay!
That's kind of where I'm going. Yeah, and it's thanks to you, Aaron, Seth, and everybody like you guys. So thank you for, helping me out of that. But
You listened. You did the work. As is evidenced by other callers, you did the work because not everybody who hears us say something.
Not everybody who hears
follows through the path.
I know. And, I am compassionate to people like that because I haven't completely let go of every single last thing. And I know how hard it is.
Oh, even when you do let go of every last thing, still be compassionate. I mean, especially since you'll be able to remember what it was like to believe.
And I have an example from a conversation that I had this morning. Somebody asked me this morning what I thought if, hey, I've got a friend, and when I'm feeling anxious, she'll ask me, hey, do you want me to put a spell on your bracelet so that I will be with you when you go? Now, the person putting the spell, air quotes, on there does not believe any of this, and the recipient does not believe any of this. It is a sort of make-believe game that they play so that they can metaphorically carry that person with them, and it's comforting. And the person who was telling me this was perhaps a little worried that I would think it was, problematic. Certainly there can be problems with something like that if somebody starts to begin to believe it, or if they're spreading that sort of misinformation and they're not actually using skepticism and critical thinking. But the example that I came up with to show why I didn't have a problem with it is, if you scrape your knee and I kiss it to make it better, neither one of us believe that me kissing your scraped knee actually does anything to heal it, but we understand it does something to comfort you.
Right.
And so even though we both know it's make-believe, I'm never going to go, oh, you shouldn't do that. Now, I might do it in the sense of, you shouldn't do that because you're spreading germs on potentially like an open wound.
These days, I would hope that you're not going around kissing knees, but...
Oh, that's nice and gaping wound there. Let me, rah. But it's to show that it's okay. If you and I are in agreement that what we're doing is make-believe, then what we're really doing is carrying on some kind of tradition or even a tradition of our own making to allow us to be more compassionate and more comforted by each other. And I don't have any objection to that. And when people find their way out of religion, sometimes they still hang on to baggage. And we'll get to what yours is in just a second. Some of that baggage is incredibly problematic, and some of it's not. So what baggage are you struggling with?
Well, it's funny because you literally touched on everything I'm going to bring up. Real quick, I have a story for you. The last time I called you, I think I talked to you about tornadoes.
Yeah.
But, anyway, we got our first warning of the season, and as usual, I freaked out, went to the shelter, and there was this lady in there. And she saw that I was scared, and her suggestion was to pray and to let God wrap me in his love and protection, as she said. And, I haven't been deconverted for that long. So inside, I cringed, but at the same time, it hurt because I didn't want to tell her I didn't believe that did any good. But at the same time, I'll be honest with you guys. Would I like to believe it? Yeah, I sure would. I would love to believe it.
But aren't you happy that you don't have a false sense of hope?
I honestly, I don't think I can answer that at this moment because, just being honest, like Matt said, even though I'm no longer a Christian, I still hang on to those comforting beliefs. Like, for instance, this corona thing that everybody's going through. This is kind of scary. And
it is.
I would love to, it is, man. I would love to think that, gosh, all we got to do is believe in God. He's going to make everything okay, and he's going to take care of us. So now I'm at the point, I just feel kind of...
I might be able to help you with this.
Where do we... Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so if a person deliberately invented COVID-19, and that person was in charge of coming up with a cure, would that comfort you?
I don't think so.
Right, because you don't want the person who made the disease to be in charge of handling the economic aftermath and coming up with a cure and a vaccine. I mean, that would be a scary thought.
Because I would argue that like the person who came up with the vaccine is the one who's most likely to know how to cure it. Or came up with the virus, most likely to be able to cure it. But I get the point.
Yeah, but you wouldn't want that person to be in charge of the economy, the aftermath, the handling of the situation, knowing that that person made the disease in the first place, right?
Right.
Okay, well, wouldn't it logically follow that if the God of the Bible existed, he would be the one that created COVID-19?
I hate to say it, but yes.
Right. So isn't it a little bit more comforting to know that this isn't some all-powerful being that designed this disease? This is a disease that exists for no intrinsic meaning, and we can do what we can to combat it. But if this disease was made by somebody who's all-powerful, then, I mean, anything we're doing is essentially helpless. But there is hope because we don't have an all-powerful being making diseases against us. Because if we did, we wouldn't stand a chance.
Don't get me wrong. If there is an all-powerful being and essentially COVID-19 or whatever, pick something, doesn't matter, is God pointing a gun at your head to get you to pray to him to not shoot you. I mean, and to stop shooting my friends and loved ones.
Right. I mean, I feel like that's a similar response, but would you agree with me that like you're comforted in the idea that a person didn't invent this and that person still be in charge of handling the aftermath?
Yeah.
Okay.
The thing that you're finding comfort in is this idealized notion that there's someone out there who cares about you and has the power to help, and all you have to do is ask. That's a very comforting idea.
Right.
The thing is, while I understand why it could be comforting with respect to religion, it's even more comforting when there's an actual live human being who cares about you, has the power to help, and maybe doesn't even have to wait to be asked, but when asked, acts.
Yeah. See, this is why I like calling you guys Matt and Shane, because you give me stuff that I wouldn't have thought of myself. I've really been struggling with this. And, you know, before I guess you'd call it deconverted, I was taught, how did it go? I've always found comfort when we as humans don't have control. We can let the one who does handle it. And now that I've lost that belief, I'm just kind of, it's almost like I feel lost, you know?
Right. No, it's very comforting to have this idea that you know someone who can do anything and that you could appeal to that. I understand that.
It's nice to be able to, you know, but it's also kind of like we're, as a humanist, one of the main things that humanists recognize is irrespective of whether there's a God, we are evidently going to be stuck sharing space with each other and maybe the only ones we can appeal to deal with our issues and solve our problems. And so while it would be nice if we knew somebody who was all-powerful and who listened and cared, we have no evidence that we have anybody like that. And so it's up to us to become as close to that as possible, to be the ones who learn as much about the universe as we can, and to be the ones who act on behalf of our sense of justice and our sense of fairness. Because the universe isn't fair, and even if there is a God, that God isn't apparently fair. And so why the hell would I pray to a God that I don't have any reason to believe exists, and who I also don't think has any reason to be fair, and who may not care at all about human endeavors, because the entirety of life is just a place to wipe your feet before you go to the afterlife, which is the real party? Why would I spend any time on that when I can actually interact with human beings to try to find us and solve the problems that we have? That's a much better use. That hands and working in action toward a goal is vastly superior to hands folded in prayer.
And I actually like that point, Matt, because in my day-to-day life, I hate to use this term, but I do try to be a, quote, blessing to others.
Yeah.
I try to make people smile, laugh, feel better, so I like that.
Yeah.
Did you guys go through this when you deconverted?
Yeah, when I first became an atheist, I didn't want there to not be a God. I just wasn't convinced there was one. However, I wanted there to be one. It wasn't until maybe a year or two after already being an atheist and starting to listen to some Christopher Hitchens that I realized, actually, not only do I not think there's a God, I think that we're pretty lucky that there probably isn't a God.
Really?
Oh, totally.
I can see why. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because it's like I was talking about earlier. I would be very discomforted if right now I found out that there was a God that deliberately made COVID-19, and that same God was in charge right now. And it's the same thing with, people bring up, you get Pascal's wager all the time, which is the idea of, it's better to believe and be wrong than to not believe and be wrong, which I would actually disagree with. But I would have to say that you're luckier to have the risk be non-existence than the risk be hell, right? I mean, not existing doesn't seem, just to a lot of people it's scary. But hell, that's a lot scarier. So I think you're luckier without something that is going to potentially torture you for all of eternity. I'm glad that thing doesn't.
I absolutely agree.
Awesome.
And Matt will tell you, I've called in multiple times about that very subject, about my fear of hell. And that's something, I don't believe in hell. But again, Matt has said this about people, and it's true about me. Even though I don't believe it, I'm terrified when I die. Oh my God, it was real.
I get it. And I know people who have been atheist longer than I've been alive, which isn't that long, but still, people who have been atheist for years, and even though they don't believe in hell, they still have a fear of it because it's something that was psychologically drilled into them at a young age. I'm lucky enough that I actually don't have a fear of hell. I was asked during a debate that I did recently, what if I'm wrong and there's a God? And I said, well, hell doesn't sound as bad as heaven to me, if I'm being blunt. Not only that, it isn't logically consistent that I could be on fire forever. I mean,
if there is a hell, Traci, where did it come from?
I know.
And I mean, this is a bit of a easy argument, maybe a little cliche to some people, but if there is a hell, then there have to be enough scientists there by now that they have air conditioning. I'm sure they've had nothing else to think about. But how do we cool this place down? Think about all of it. Albert Einstein, he's been there for a year. You know what I mean?
I do. That's pretty good.
Okay, so for me, the reason fire hurts you is because it's destroying your cells. Well, by definition, you can't be constantly being destroyed. That's logically inconsistent. The only way I can fathom a universe in which I could permanently be on fire, the only way I can rationalize that would be for me to constantly be being regenerated, which means I don't know why I would think I would be in pain throughout it. It would be happening always. So.
Yeah, that's my boyfriend's theory. That's the only way it could happen. And oh gosh, even when I was a full-blown Christian, which again wasn't too long ago, I always had a problem with the doctrine of hell, but the way I was taught, it's well, you might not like it, but you have to believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
that's the thing. If it were true, whether or not we like it doesn't matter. There are people who view the atheist experience in these conversations, and their view of me and us is, we just got angry with God, or we don't like the concept of God, or we don't want to be subject to God. No, I genuinely don't believe there's a God. And if there is a God who's anything at all like what's described in the Bible or the Quran, I'm not going to worship or serve that being. I find them morally repugnant and morally inferior, and I don't see that they're doing anything intelligent or compassionate or even participatory in the human experience. At most, what they've done is construct a scenario that sends countless of people spiraling through a difficult universe, suffering from anxiety and countless other issues because they've been taught to let go and let God, and that shit just doesn't work.
I mean, and I feel bad for admitting this, but I mean, I know. And just that I guess those last strings still tug on me, like, how dare you say this? How can you say that?
Right.
You know.
Yep.
But I mean, the world that we would like to live in has nothing to do with the kind of world that we actually do live in. And I actually think there is some danger in people believing in things that aren't true. So I think if you realize a harsh truth, then it's good that you can still acknowledge it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I love talking to you guys. I just gotta say that. That's why I call so much. That, and I honestly don't have any other atheists or agnostics I can talk to. So I'm really glad you're there.
Well, thanks, Traci.
Thank you.
I got to try and move on to other calls. We only got like 9 minutes left, and there's still like 5 people on hold. So
cool. I'll call in again another time, guys. Thank you so much.
they wanted me to tell you to get on Discord because there's plenty of people there to talk to.
Yay! I'll look you guys up.
All right, thanks. They'll
Take care.
Put the link up there as well.
She seems like a really honest woman who's, I mean...
Yeah, you know, and I get it. It's difficult, but, you know, she's finding her way through. And
sometimes the answer in life is tough. I mean, I remember when I became a determinist, I wasn't, you know, I wanted to justify believing in free will, but I realized I couldn't do it, and tough.
Hey, Damon in Detroit, you're on with Shane and Matt.
How's it going?
It says here you can prove reincarnation.
Nice.
Because before the universe, there was nothing, then energy, then eventually back to nothing, then repeat. Is that a summary?
Yes. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
So A, how do you know before the universe there was nothing? And B, how do you know it's going to repeat?
Right. So basically, this I call this the cosmic reincarnation hypothesis because
hypothesis isn't proof.
I call it a hypothesis because I'm trying to base it on other hypotheses that are out there.
I get it, but something isn't a hypothesis unless it's testable.
Right.
Because what we have here is that you can prove reincarnation. Are you saying that you can prove it or that you are trying to?
No, what I'm trying to do is figure out if I have a plausible or reasonable justification for it being true.
Okay.
So
you're not trying to prove it. You're trying to see if the reason you believe it is a good one.
So, yeah, what do you know about the state of the affairs? What do you know about the state of the affairs before the current incarnation of our universe?
Okay. So in order for this to be true, there are some assumptions that have to be made, a lot of them.
That's why I was asking
about
a
9
question.
that I came up with. Right. So and that gets to, and that is one of the assumptions.
Okay.
And that is that before.
No. You don't get to assume one of the things that are. So when you try to put together an argument, and your argument is essentially before the universe there was nothing, and then you say that's an assumption. Okay, now it's out as a premise. You don't just get to assume it.
Right.
You need to demonstrate it. Also, that's why I said at the beginning, how do you know there was nothing before, and how do you know it's going to repeat? The repeat thing is the most potentially damning of the whole thing, because you could make potential arguments for why it might be reasonable to presume that there was nothing, although I don't think that the universe from nothing remotely makes sense. I don't know what a nothing is or how anything could act upon it. Right. I think there's always been everything just in some form or another, but I don't know how you get to evidence that this is going to repeat, and what you're describing is not reincarnation. Regeneration or a change in the structure of matter is not reincarnation. When I die and I decompose, the fact that the molecules of my body go out into the universe and become other things and everything else doesn't mean that there's a new mat formed somewhere. So that's still not reincarnation.
If anything, it sounds like you're arguing for a circular timeline. Is that what you're going at?
So no, I think what Matt said in terms of regeneration being the better word to use, that would, that makes sense.
Okay, but you can't prove. But you can't prove that either. That's my point. That this is an entirely speculative exercise that you can't test.
Okay, let me.
And so, why would we spend time on something that is speculative that can't be tested?
So, these things are based on what various scientists believe.
I don't
Right?
care.
For example.
I don't care. The question I asked is, why would we spend time on something that is speculative, that cannot be tested? Pointing to some science, it's based on some things that some scientists believe, is irrelevant.
So many scientists.
Who cares?
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
The number of scientists that believe something don't suddenly make it true, does it? Do you have some
no.
way? Do you have some way to test what will happen to the universe after heat death?
No, absolutely not.
There you
There's
go.
No way.
So that's the end of the story. So you've come up with a hypothesis that isn't a hypothesis because it's not testable. So what you have is an interesting thought that is speculative that you can't make any progress on demonstrating is real.
Right. Now, the thing is, though, it was based on hypothesis from other, scientific hypothesis, like quantum fields and all that jazz. But you're absolutely right that it cannot be, there's no way to test it.
Okay.
So, I can see that.
Okay. So we're going to move on because we got 2 more callers waiting and like 4 minutes left on the show, but thanks. Anna Marie wants to know, how do we deal with coincidences, unexplained events, and other things, but you can't dismiss them, but they're not evidence? Is that, give us a ballpark on what you're asking.
Well, when I came out to my mom as an atheist, we ended up having a relatively short conversation with a consisted of her asking me why I didn't believe in a God anymore. It was very civil, but she brought up multiple points that I'd always used when I still believed.
Right.
Okay.
They were basically like my strongest reasons for belief, and like when I did, and even now, things like them still pop up in conversation from time to time. These are things like my great-grandmother during my mom's pregnancies, like predicting whether or not me, my brother, and my sibling would survive. They all came true, whether we, or survived or not.
Okay. I mean, there are a few.
She also witnessed.
I'm sorry, go on.
She witnessed a terminal family member who, just before he passed, shut up straight up in bed and seemed to witness things, And then, like, another conversation, during the conversation, she mentioned other family who had near-death experiences who all consistently seemed to see a light, quote unquote.
Is this all tied to your grandmother? Or were you just... Okay. All right.
This is all tied to my mother and experiences she's had. Ultimately, she asked me how I explain all that. And all I could really say at the time was, I don't know.
Can you say any more now?
I don't know anymore.
Then the answer is still, I don't know.
Right, we can never, there's no way that we could rule out a coincidence.
All I could say was, I don't know. Like,
right.
I want to believe in the divine and afterlife, but... these are strange coincidences that make, like when you're going to sleep at night, the little voice in your back of your head goes like, what if?
Right.
What if's fine.
But rationally, I can't say that any of it is evidence at all.
Right. So I guess the best way to deal with it, like in a really simple way, have you heard of a false cause fallacy?
No.
Okay. Google, after this conversation, Google false cause fallacy. Now, what it is it's a logical fallacy in which a person conflates correlation with causation. So, for example, 100% of people who have died have drank water. That doesn't prove that water kills people, though, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Right. It's when somebody conflates there being correlation between two events and saying that because there is correlation, that therefore there is causation. Correlation doesn't prove causation. So the fact that somebody prayed for you to get better if you were sick and then you actually got better doesn't prove that the prayer was the reason you got better. In fact, you could actually try to pray to a different God, pray to a piece of a rock, a piece of bark on the ground, and see if you get a different... what the accuracy rate is with results.
By the way, intercessory prayer has been tested by people who were at least honest despite hoping for a result, and it works at exactly the rate of a coin toss.
Right.
Unless the people who you're praying for know they're being prayed for, and then it works less often.
Right.
And they speculate about anxiety. That not only looking up that fallacy is a good idea, but also that what if game, which is
you should
play it, because what if there is a God, and the best evidence that this God is able to produce is that your grandmother was able to predict whether or not a specific small set of children would live or not, and leave people wondering, hey, did that message come from God, or is that a guess, or is it coincidence, or is there some other source? If it were a God, what the hell kind of God in this what-if scenario is giving that kind of information to, like, your grandmother about this tiny set of people, and yet doesn't provide any better evidence for its existence?
Yeah, no, I never thought about that, like actually following that line of thought.
Yeah, it's one of those things where people want to look at these things and say, oh my gosh, it's such clear evidence of God. It couldn't be anything else. We can't think of anything else. And it happens all over. It happens all the time. Here's this church who needed money and prayed for it. Here's this church who got together and prayed and somebody got well. Here's this person who actually said they got a message from God and it came through. It just happens all the time. It's such clear evidence for God. Well, if that's the case, and it actually is clear evidence for God, then how could it be a problem for God just to show up here on the Atheist Experience, stand right here, and give everyone incontrovertible, clear evidence for God? Why does it have to be these little things that maybe they're coincidence? We can't really be sure. And yet people want to say, this is the clear and best evidence for God, right up there with, look at the trees.
Right.
Those types of things.
He's clearly being vague and ambiguous intentionally.
That's a cagey God that, I have no, if that kind of God exists, I mean, that's closer to Loki, a mischief God, than a God that cares about us. If I care about somebody, I tell them.
Right.
In the case of my family member who seemed to see, someone they knew before they died, is it possible that someone hallucinates when they're about to die?
Yes.
Yes.
I promise you, yes.
From what we know of how the brain works, a dying brain is malfunctioning, and a brain starved of oxygen is malfunctioning. And both of those things are often the case, and they produce what we identify as hallucination.
Yeah.
The thing that you'll get back when you present this as a possible explanation is, well, maybe they were hallucinating, well, maybe they weren't, or maybe what you call a hallucination is actually a message from God. How do you tell the difference between a hallucination and an actual message from God? And the answer to that is, if I can't tell the difference between a hallucination and a message from God, God fucked up.
Yep.
Actually, a little bit.
Anyway, the audio seems to have gotten cut off.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, Anne-Marie. We got one more caller we're going to try to get to, even though we've run over time a little bit. I just wanted to say that I got a message from my girlfriend who's watching chat, who said that people in chat really like Shane. I already told Mark to add Shane to the regular co-host rotation list. So air fist bump. Boom, welcome. And somebody else asked what I thought about the Anunnaki, Inky, et cetera, and I think it's a load of crap and some poetry that people are trying to read too much into. But we're going to finish the show with Brian in South Carolina. Thanks for patiently waiting. You're on with Shane and Matt.
Yeah, I'm here. Hey. Yeah, well, I just wanted to, I know we're out of time, but just Shane, I heard you earlier, this is a sidetrack, but I just kind of wanted to mention, because you said you brought up the King James versus the New King James, and how thou shalt not kill is a different word and it's murder.
Right.
But yeah, it's just kind of works in redundancy, because it's the same word. It means murder. The Hebrew word is the same word that means murder. And there's another word they use in other instances, in Leviticus, talking about animal sacrifice.
Well, the first translation that we have says kill. I mean, most of the translations that I've read say kill. The New King James Version is the only one that I can think of that says murder. I'm not asserting it's the only one that says that, but it's the only one that I know of that does.
But it's exactly, you're making the same point that I made, which is that how do we resolve which one is the correct understanding?
Because they disagree.
Usage, and we go back to the and we go back to the Hebrew word that is being translated and try to find out what the best understanding of that term is.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the same.
Yeah, that's why.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
And that's the answer. It's just the same word. And then there's animal sacrifice is still kill, but it's a different Hebrew word. So it means it's not the same as murder. So I'm just saying, I was just letting you know, it sounds like you don't do like just basic things, just basic stuff like that. At least Shane, I don't know about you, Matt, but.
You think after me describing the exact scenario in which we can go back to try to find the original Hebrew word to study it, you thought you needed to explain this to us because you don't think that we maybe do the basics on this?
No, to Shane. I was talking about what Shane said.
Okay, but
because if
Shane's making a point.
If Shane already knew that, then he wouldn't have even said that.
No, he would have said it. That you missed the entire point. The fact of the matter is, there are two different English translations of a term. One of them, kill, is the more popular one. It is the one that has been there the longest in English translation. And the other one is a newer, modern change that is probably based on the best scholarly research of intent. But yet we have this where people have been potentially confused for ages based on the translation that they have, and God didn't fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, good. That's a segue, man. No, I'm glad you said that. Because that kind of, I'm not even to my topic, but.
Well, we only got like a couple minutes, so we need to get to it quick.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, just the fact that you said God doesn't show us. It's like you have I don't know what you think God's supposed to be, but even a basic Christian knows that God even created evil for the day of destruction. There's people who are not supposed to be believers, not all of us.
No, a basic Christian does. A basic
God who lives in a house, just go knock on his door and say, "Hey, are you real?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm right here." You know.
Well, he should be, and a basic Christian doesn't know that. That's what a basic Christian believes. We don't get to claim knowledge of something.
No.
We have to demonstrate knowledge. We don't just get to say, "I know this to be true." No, that's what you believe to be true.
No, that's what. We're talking Bible, so that's what the Bible.
If you want to talk Bible, I got one. I've studied one. I used to teach one. I used to preach one. We can go to the Bible. And the Bible says that wherever two or more you are gathered together in my name, whatever you ask, I shall do. Does it not?
Yeah, to his will.
So that,
but it has
to his will.
You can't just pray for spaghetti and get spaghetti.
Why not? That's not what the verse says.
That's the teaching of the Bible. You can't. It sounds like you cherry pick.
No, it sounds like Christians cherry picked, and when they find out that a specific claim does not work out or that they don't have evidence for it, they go to something else. It's the Christians that cherry pick. It's the Christians that cherry pick, and that's why there's over 1,000 denominations that all identify as Christian that disagree on every single point.
If you're talking about Christianity and different denominations, you're probably talking about things like that aren't essential to the faith, but the core doctrine is still there.
Okay. Talk to you later. Thanks, everybody, for calling in. Thanks to the people who did not show up. Normally, there's a bunch of people on the other side of the wall, and then we have food and everything afterwards. But I want to specifically thank people for not showing up and following the good protocols that CDC are set in place to help us minimize the impact of this pandemic. We do not know what will happen next week. I heard that there was supposed to be some kind of briefing from the White House around the time we were starting this show. There's probably going to be additional changes. We here at the Atheist Community of Austin are, in fact, concerned about this and taking the best precautions that we can and still allowing us to produce content. But if it gets to a point where we can't produce content, we just won't. Right. But one of the things that people had suggested was, well, why don't we do something? Why don't we go out and help the homeless? And why don't we just get a bunch of test kits? Trust me, if there was a way for me to get my hands on test kits to get them to the people in need, we would already done it.
Yeah.
States can't even do it, which is why New York is essentially asking the federal government to step in, because with multiple states competing for test kits, what does that happen? In a free market? All of a sudden the state that's willing to pay more is going to get it. So now the prices of the tests are inflating. The access hasn't gone up. What we're going to recommend, or what I will recommend, is this. Take care of yourself. Wash your hands. Don't touch your face with dirty hands. Try not to go out in public and interact with people. Continue to try to support the local businesses, including restaurants that may be able to deliver to you while you're at home, because those people are not only working for lower wages, but maybe tip dependent. And if nobody's coming to the restaurant, nobody's tipping, all of a sudden, all of their salaries go down. They're already, in many cases, most of those people are living paycheck to paycheck. Some of them aren't necessarily going to have access to healthcare. Some of them are going to be elderly people or immunocompromised people who are at greater risk, and yet they are there trying to do those things. Give a special thank you to them, not only, by calling them, by sending them a letter or whatever else, but by noting, hey, you stock a grocery store, and while my grocery store is not particularly well stocked at all right now, I realize that that's the fault of all the people who ran in to buy everything, and I'm especially grateful to Shane for what he does and what other people are doing. So take care of yourselves, take care of each other within the bounds of what is safe to do so. Try not to panic. Stay alert but not anxious, as a friend of mine pointed me to in a video from a doctor. But don't undervalue this.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that, for all of my fellow skeptics out there, those conspiracy theories are starting. They already exist. Go find the conspiracies and debunk them. And if you don't want to debunk them, find me on Facebook, send me the conspiracy theories, and I'll debunk them myself. Because there is a lot of bullshit out there, and it doesn't end with religion.
It starts with the president, who's been lying to the nation for a month or so about how this is going to miraculously go away, or we've got it all under control, or the number of cases is going down. All of those things that he has claimed are demonstrably false. However, I will also caution people, do not lay the blame for corona in the United States at the foot of the president.
Yeah,
the misinformation is his fault. But the fact is, we don't have a healthcare system that was necessarily ready for this, and we did not begin quickly enough because we have a tendency, all of us, to say, it won't happen to me. It's not that big of a deal. I have a friend who was unimpressed with the virus because it doesn't have that much in the way of strong symptoms, and the death rate's still kind of low compared to some other virus. The fact that you can find another virus that is deadlier doesn't in any way change the impact of this. And it's having an impact.
The relative privation fallacy at its finest.
It's having an impact beyond individuals' health. It is having an impact on markets and jobs and money and the healthcare system. And the healthcare system, the people who are working in the healthcare system, who are supposed to be there to treat us and test us, can't do either if they are the ones at the greatest risk, and they are the ones who are coming down with it most frequently.
And touching on your last point, there was something that I read on Facebook. It was Trump isn't responsible for COVID-19, Obama wasn't responsible for Ebola, Bush wasn't responsible for SARS, and Clinton was only responsible for a few cases of herpes.
Well played. We'll see you next time. Take care of each other. There's the guys that make the show happen. We'll see you next time.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.
Hi, I'm Matt Dillahunty, president of the Atheist Community of Austin here in Austin, Texas. March 23rd, 2020 is Atheist Day internationally, an effort that was begun by Atheist Republic and is shared by many organizations around the world, promoting an opportunity for people to get to know and understand atheism, atheists, for atheists to come out and to stand in opposition to oppressive governments, mobs, and religious zealots. Religious privilege and intolerance have marginalized many non-believers. In many places, they're being killed. In many places, their rights are being marginalized. But even here in the United States, while I have no fear as an atheist of being killed by a religious mob, I do have to deal with many individuals who are being ostracized from their family, who are being set aside and cast aside, who feel no good sense of community, and who have difficulty interacting with family, and whose rights are being marginalized, if not in the letter of the law, then in what the public pushes forward in their acceptance of people who don't share their religious views, or more accurately, their lack of acceptance for those people. Now in Austin, we were going to participate by having a big rally at the Capitol, and we had a PA system. We had speakers coming in from all around the country and the world, Seth Andrews, Mandisa Thomas, and others. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to make a change of plans. In the interest of the health and safety of everyone involved, most of our speakers are not traveling to Austin at all, and instead will be submitting videos so that we will be producing as part of this special live stream, Atheist Day International Austin. In addition, the Atheist Community of Austin's Free Thought Library is closed to the public. The only people who will be at the building are cast and crew or individual speakers, and we've quarantined the building off into sections in order to minimize the impact of this virus on everyone involved. But we won't let anything stop us from continuing to push for equality and rights and understanding of the atheist, secular, free-thinking, non-believing community, whatever label you choose to put on it. We're going to keep pushing forward. So, if you're quarantined, if you're stuck at home, if you are practicing social isolation, take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, follow the necessary precautions, get yourself something nice to drink, sit back in a chair, and watch this special presentation of Atheist Day Austin.
Hello everyone, I'm Mandisa Thomas, founder and president of Black Nonbelievers Incorporated, which is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. I am happy to be joining you today for International Atheist Day. I wish it could be in person, but of course, due to the current circumstances, that isn't possible, but I'm happy to be joining you via video today, and I hope you know how special and important a day like this is for us. It is still important that we are dispelling any stigma and negativity surrounding the term atheist and the identity. First, it is a very simple identity, meaning that we don't believe in any gods, spirits, or supernatural beings. Some would further describe it as, the rejection of all existing claims of any gods, which is totally valid, or any other deities, because if we don't believe in any gods, we certainly don't believe in any devils or evil spirits as actually existing. Now, on its face, that's very simple, right? You think people would just accept that for what it is and it be okay. But of course, as we know, unfortunately, it is not. And as you can tell by the focus of my organization for marginalized communities, that this can be much more of a challenge for us. Now, you see me here as a Black woman who does identify as atheist. Now, traditionally, or as we've seen in the public sphere, there aren't that many of us who would subscribe to non-belief or atheism who are openly identifying, right? And there are a number of reasons for that. In my involvement in this movement for going on 10 years now, I've talked to people who want to know, why aren't there more Black atheists, or why aren't there more people of color openly identifying? Why aren't more of us participating in the communities that we know exist? So for those of you who aren't aware but should be, I speak for a number of atheists in the Black community, and I can tell you that having been raised in New York City in the Black community, it can be a challenge to openly identify. Now, there's always been critique of the church within the community. Don't get it twisted. the Black community is not a monolith. We are perfectly capable of questioning oppressive institutions, especially as it pertains to racial justice, economic justice, rather injustice towards our communities and other marginalized people. The challenge, though, is that there is still an overwhelming and pervasive presence of the church within the community, and there is this perception that not only does the church identify that it is our identifier, but also that it is a support system in a way that people actually need it. Now, some of us, myself included, would challenge that. As we challenge that narrative, because for one, it isn't true, and then institutionally, it has been a breeding ground for a number of other oppressive institutions, just like racism, economic injustice, and such. And so these are things that, as a community, it's important for us to talk about, and it's important for us to challenge. Now, it starts with first accepting the identity that atheism and being an atheist is not a dirty word, that it is something that we can be proud of. We can be proud of incorporating our identities and our ideals and our practices into our everyday lives. There are a number of us who do good for the world. We want to see as much improvement as possible. And we see this now, even with the current circumstances, right? This is not the first outbreak or pandemic that we've ever experienced. However, it is important for us to look to the science and technological advancements in order to prevent these things from happening and to prevent more people from getting infected. This does not happen without these advancements, and it's important for us to speak up. This is one of the reasons why it's good to band together as a community. And again, it starts with acknowledgments and days like this. Now, community building is important to me personally, as well as to the mission of our organization, because we are still dealing with a representation problem within our own community. And also, we have a tendency to point the finger at the religious community and how they've been oppressive towards others. However, some of us still incorporate those formerly religious beliefs and ideals and kind of bring them into the secular movement and communities. And this is something that we continue to have to discuss and tackle. Now, should it be entirely up to me as a Black woman atheist who is the head of an organization that specifically focuses on the Black atheists? No, it should not. Because the more we see our world changing, the more we see that our communities are changing. It is important for those who have been involved, whether you've been involved in the community for a long time or you're just entering the community, how we engage each other, and also how we understand and support the different mechanisms within our community, whether they are online, whether they are or in person, which are they're all very important. How we continue to support and sustain each other will be crucial to our growth and development. I don't want to say survival, because there are many people who are coming out of religion, and there always will be. In fact, we know that there are now the non-religious community is among the largest voting bloc. It's the numbers are growing. It's showing, but how we continue to mobilize is going to be crucial. So, with that being said, once we come to the identity, once we once we continue to develop our support systems for people who are questioning religion, and some of who are deathly afraid to identify as atheists, and in some areas of the world that could still be a death sentence. It is very, very dangerous at times, but it is important that for those of us who have the capability to organize and speak up and put together events like this, we continue to do so, but it does not happen without the support of the people. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to be in front and center like some of us. However, the support behind the scenes is just as important. So with that being said, I'd like to continue to ask all of you to support organizations like the Atheist Community of Boston, who, if you see here, supported the Black Non-Believers CCon in 2019. They were one of our sponsors. So these are just a few different ways that we support each other. You may have seen me previously on Talk Heathen and the Atheist Experience with our beloved Matt Dillahunty, who is just an amazing individual. Matt was someone who was crucial to my re-identification as an atheist, because of the way he just his no nonsense, matter of fact approach. And that's something that we can appreciate, the fact that there are different approaches to this subject, and also to our the way we relate and communicate. Sometimes it won't be pretty, and that's okay, but the more we stand strong and the more we band together as a community as much as possible, while working on the things that we need to internally, because they are important. So of course, as I said before, my focus, and personally and as an organization, is to increase the visibility and the representation of Black folks who are atheists, questioning religion, in favor of leaving, as well as building up that community in support. And this is done through a number of ways. I just showed you one of them, which is our cruise convention that we started doing in 2017. Hopefully, we will be able to embark on this journey in 2020. Keeping my fingers crossed, not praying on it. But also, too, it is to amplify the voices of women of color in this movement, which is done through the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference, which is still slated to take place from September 25th through the 27th of this year. You will hear from some dynamic women of color in this movement, and also who are just doing some fantastic and important work as it pertains to human rights, whether it is LGBTQ rights, reproductive rights, racial justice, and also the atheist identity, standing up for our community, which a number of us do. And so also, it isn't just about Black Non-Believers as an organization. For those of you who aren't aware, I also serve on the boards for American Atheists and the American Humanist Association. I also volunteer with Recovering from Religion. And those of you who follow the ACA and the programming, you may be very familiar with Dr. Darrell Ray, who is another wonderful human being and a very close colleague of mine. We respect each other's work. We work together, and this is amazing. And I also want to point out my co-organizers for Women of Color Beyond Belief, Dr. Sakibu Hutchinson, who is based out of Los Angeles, and Bridget Crutchfield, who is on the board for Black Non-Believers and who is the lead organizer for our Detroit affiliate. So if you aren't familiar with these women, I highly suggest that you become familiar and get to know our work. Please do support our organization. We are, along with the Atheist Community of Boston, we are a 501c3 organization, and donations to us are tax deductible. If you can see here, we do also have an online store that you can proudly sport our gear no matter who you are. We also have other merchandise for sale. That is, if you're familiar and if you've ever watched ACA programming, you've seen being mugs there. You've seen folks wearing our shirts. And so again, it is important that even if you, as someone who is a non-person of color, is not at the center of, is not at the center of the focus, do understand that there are a number of us who are continuing to come out, and mutual support will be needed for not just those individuals, but also for the organization. So in closing, I'd like for you to once again consider supporting the atheist community of Austin and its wonderful and diverse programming. Support organizations like Black Nonbelievers, in which there is a number of content. We provide in-person support and community in which everyone is welcome. We also advocate for open atheist and non-religious identification, because if people don't know where we stand, then they really may not know who we are at all. And again, it's important for us, even if you are the type of person who doesn't necessarily like to have those arguments, you feel like you may not be able to articulate it the same way someone like Matt would, or even myself would. It is important to provide that support for those of us who do. Many folks are coming out of the church and they're very jaded by their experiences, which is completely understandable. Religion, I do contend that it is problematic in our society. However, we must understand that as human beings, many of us do have many of the same goals, but that secular communities and organizations still need your support in order to fight these battles that we are facing. And understanding that, again, we don't exist in a vacuum. There are things that we work out, but we work them out with reason and compassion. They aren't enemies of each other. So once again, I'd like to thank you for having me. Please visit our website at blacknonbelievers.org. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and on YouTube. Thank you very much and enjoy your day.
Hello, this is Dr. Darrell Ray, President of Recovering from Religion and author of The God Virus and Sex and God. What does it mean to be an atheist activist? I think many people believe it is being a podcaster, going on the atheist experience, writing a book, a blog, or writing a letter to the editor. I can't deny those are forms of activism, but they're not the only forms, and they're certainly not something that everyone can or should do. Personally, I think atheist activism is getting shit done. Of course, I've done all the things I mentioned, podcasting, writing books, letters to the editor, and I'm glad I did them. But the thing I am most proud of are the things that make a demonstrable difference in people's lives. Don't hear me dissing all those wonderful people doing podcasts, YouTubers, bloggers, etc. I love all of them. There's only so much need for those roles. You don't need to be a YouTuber or blogger to make any difference. Anyone can make a difference and advance the goal of reducing superstition in the world. I see atheist activism as anything where you can use your individual talents to make a demonstrable difference in someone's life or the lives of a group. If you only look at those who are out front making a splash, you might never recognize that you have a huge potential to influence many people, even challenge entire systems. For example, one of the little things I enjoy doing is helping people write letters to local school districts when they violate church-state law. I also love finding people who are doing good work and writing a little note to them expressing my appreciation for their efforts. The people I most admire are my atheist colleagues who work every Monday helping the homeless here in my home city. The atheists who make a trip to the state capitol and talk to legislatures about LGBTQ rights with legislators are some people I admire. The atheists who run support groups for Black non-believers in cities all across the U.S. The atheists who clean up local parks. The atheists who build ramps for the handicapped or cut grass for elderly people. So the moral of my story is the real activists are in our community and are those that are getting shit done. I'm all about helping people learn to live the best lives they can. I'm about cleaning up the road near my home that my mostly Christian neighbors trashed. I'm about finding the good that people are doing and making sure they get recognized. I'm about volunteering for recovering from religion and chatting with people in need of help on the helpline. I think atheist activism is about building an ethic and habit of focus on community and support for others. There's so much to be done as an atheist activist, and it feels so good when you're doing it.
Ah, yes. It's Atheist Day in Austin, Texas, and I am celebrating it the traditional way one celebrates Atheist Day in Austin, Texas, by being in quarantine in Denver, Colorado. Yes, that is the tradition. If you aren't already aware, book your flights now. I'm sure you will have no problem getting a good flight to Denver, Colorado right now. I mean, if you do, it'll probably be on the cheap. No, it is true, though. I am here in quarantine in Denver, Colorado, in my house. This is my little home set and studio, but still excited to celebrate Atheist Day with the atheist community of Austin, they are. Wow, this is so far just like a really great, just like a top-notch advocacy video. The atheist community of Austin is a fantastic organization that is so important to me because I am so much interested in seeing a world where atheism is talked about in a very positive light. And I think that they are pushing that idea of positive atheism, secular humanism, and just making us look a lot better than we really are. No, I'm kidding. But they sure do make us look good. Because that activism is really important, especially in times like these. Right now, we are fighting a pandemic in our country. And they're at the head of, and listen, I don't want to get too political here, but if you've ever seen my show, you should have expected it. At the head of the response team of the people we should be putting our trust in to make these decisions is a person who doesn't believe in evolution. A fact. Evolution is a fact. Is a person who is trying to pray the COVID away. This is the world we currently live in, where it is facts against fiction. It is science against not science. I mean, is there anything more not science than what said individual believes in? We need to be sticking up for truth, secularism, humanism, but also science. And I think it is more important than ever. This pandemic, I give up. No, this pandemic, it will pass. We will get through it. On the other side of it, most people, it looks like, will be alive. It's going to be hard because there is going to be loss, and we may all know somebody who either didn't make it or who is somebody close to someone who didn't make it. In fact, I'd say it's likely we will at least know somebody who was close to somebody who didn't make it. And after this is all said and done, the world will probably just go back to normal. And I think that's something we can't stand for. I think that we have to advocate for change, for a difference, to make things better. Because I dare say there are going to be people on the other side of this who receive their medications, who get to use these respirators that are in short supply. There are going to be people who quarantined. There are going to be people who isolated, who followed all of the medical guidelines. Medical science will hopefully catch up, probably not for a while, but with a vaccine, and all of those things will happen. And then there will be a huge group of people who just ignore that and thank God for delivery from this pandemic, something that it would have been a far greater blessing for him to never have let begun, but we'll thank him, in the aftermath. That's not something that we can then allow our country or the countries around the world to settle in on. We can't allow it to be that, we did it. Thank God. Now let's go back to the status quo and not be prepared for the next one. Because we got kind of lucky that this pandemic doesn't have a much higher mortality rate. And truly, it is luck. The next one could be much, much worse. We could be talking about double-digit mortality rates, something that kills as bad as Ebola does, but it spreads as easily as this does. And we have to be prepared, and the way to be prepared is to advocate for those things that come from our secular values. Good, well-researched medical science. Right now, we're not just talking about advocacy of it would be so nice if there would be world peace, which obviously there would be. Don't take that as, I'm not trying to downplay how great world peace would be. It'd be great if there was unity. It'd be great if we could agree on more. It'd be great if we could all have the same standards of facts. But it'd also be great if we were prepared to survive. It'd also be great if everyone was as motivated to see the thriving of life on Earth, including human life. Instead, we are faced with a number of people who seem to be excited for the end of the world. That's what advocacy, when it comes to atheism, is about. That's the type of atheist advocacy I like to see. That which leads to the betterment of humans. That which makes us better. That which makes us healthier. That which makes us live longer. That which makes us love better. That's what I'm hoping for. And so that's a very, obviously, specific to the time. Obviously, also, I want to see another thing. If you've seen my channel, I'm a very big queer rights advocate, activist, and member of the queer community. Excuse me, I've just had a strawberry milkshake, and it makes me a little burpy. I could edit all of this stuff out, but wouldn't it be more fun if I didn't? I definitely want to see the world moving in a direction of empathy for everybody, with people who aren't so eager to get in the way of another person's rights on the basis of a belief that they cannot prove to be true. Don't get me wrong. Of course, there has to be limitations to what we allow people to do to each other. And it's a good thing that we can recognize that those limitations must exist. But upon what basis we determine those limitations has to be something we can all agree on. Because there seems to be these very basic things we can all figure out. We don't argue about whether or not ovens are hot. We have ways to prove it, and we all seem to accept it no matter what our history and our background is. Except for Milton. He's going to argue with everyone about everything. So forget Milton. I'm just kidding. If you're watching and your name's Milton, you're great. But if you're that Milton, screw you. We know that there are ways we can all come together and agree on certain things. We need to figure out what that standard is for these greater ideas, for these greater situations, for how we should treat each other and what the limitations on what humans can be allowed to do to each other are. It can't be upon these arbitrary grounds, these holy books, these beliefs that I just feel so deep in my heart are true, because at the end of the day, so many people believe things on that basis and they're contrary to each other. So how do we figure out what we all do, how we all treat each other? And so that's to me why being an activist in the atheist movement for good, positive things is so important. Because in a world where people have differing opinions based upon the religion that they belong to, we can say, hey, how about this message that needs no religion but can unify us all? That's what atheist activism means to me. This video was a bit rambly. I acknowledge that. But I didn't script anything. I took my cues from Mark. He said, give me 10 minutes on what atheist activism and advocation, and I don't even remember which word he actually used was. And now I'm 20 seconds away from achieving that goal. So the following are fruits I very much enjoy in order of how much I enjoy them. First, I gotta go with mangoes. Fantastic. Second, raspberries. Though growing up in a home with a British mother, they are certainly it's raspberries, but whatever. Either way, they're delicious. I also enjoy grapes, but I go through phases where I don't know which kind of grape I like the most. I think right now, if I was going for a grape, I'd probably go for a big juicy black grape. But green grapes, that little tang, that little sour, not really tang, but that little sour bite, pretty good too. I also like strawberries, apples. We'll just do top 5. There you go. That's and you know what's funny is I more like using strawberries in things than eating a whole strawberry. But I think we've reached the 10 minutes. Thank you, everybody. Happy Atheist Day. Thank you to the atheist community of Austin for everything you do. You're absolutely fantastic. And I'm happy that more and more people are associating atheism and what we do and what we are out trying to accomplish with the kind of message that the atheist community of Austin is trying to spread. I'm glad that not everybody feels that way yet, but it is spreading, and it is spreading more rapidly because of the work the ACA does. So thank you very much to the ACA. Bye, everyone. Love you all. And look at that. I've gone well over the 10 minutes. We're at like 11 something.
Hey, everyone. I'm Jen Aldrich, host of Godless Bitches 3.0, produced by the atheist community of Austin, and host of the Atheist Winedown. Happy Atheist Day. For those of you who are new to our community, welcome. You are wanted and accepted here by so many who have walked very similar paths to yours. For those already in our community, thank you. It is you who have created a place of love, acceptance, and caring that so many have needed for so long. This year's event was originally supposed to be held at the Texas State Capitol building in Austin, Texas. Even with our events being held virtually, the significance of a place designed to create and uphold laws couldn't be ignored. Around the world, atheists are living in fear under laws governing them according to and influenced by faiths we no longer believe in. Many are having their autonomy, happiness, and lives taken from them simply for not believing. Others every day are facing lawmakers who are working diligently to make sure that their faith is law, stripping so many of being able to live as they are, based on faiths we no longer adhere to. Today, on our day, we are here to stand up and say we will no longer be silent. We will no longer stand for the days of pretending we do not exist out of fear of being ostracized or what may happen if we don't maintain the status quo. You cannot cast us out anymore. We are here as a community to support those you have thrown away for their beliefs and identities. We are here as voices for those who cannot speak to say we will no longer be controlled and ruled by faiths that have damaged and hurt us. To quote one of my favorite poems from author Dylan Thomas, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. We will no longer go quietly into the darkness of being suppressed, hurt, judged, abused, abandoned, and damaged underfaiths that tell us we are wrong for simply being who we are. We will no longer be cast aside and ostracized for using our brains as they were intended, to analyze, to question, to be skeptical of things presented before us. We will no longer live in fear simply by acting on how evolution has created us to be, to create, to love, to question, to understand. We are the light of the future, the light of acceptance, hope, equality, education, and love. We, in our quest for understanding, have become the light this world needs in a time of change, reason, and truth. We are the light of equality. We are the light of love. We are the light of acceptance. We are the light of those that refuse to be quiet and miserable. We are the light of those to stand up and say, everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone deserves to be equal. And everyone deserves to be loved. We are the light that are demanding hope, that are demanding that everyone can finally see who you are, who you love. What you question is not something that should be cast aside, is not something that should be ignored, but embraced and treated as equally as the person standing next to you. I thank you all for being here today. Without you, we could not be the voices we need to be. We could not have heard your stories, seen your compassion, heard your pain, and had our eyes open to the work that motivates us to speak for and build this community. For those of you that cannot speak, we are here to be your voices. We are here to hear your stories, and we are here to understand your pain. Thank you.
As we stockpile food and supplies, hold our families close, and isolate ourselves in our bunkers of solitude, I want to offer a glimmer of hope. The world is coming together in an unprecedented way to wage war against this common enemy. And thanks to increased global investments in medical breakthroughs and scientific research, we're winning. Due to scientific progress in gene sequencing, scientists were able to sequence the coronavirus faster than ever before in history, and scientists around the world were able to share information and promptly begin working on treatments and vaccines. As of March 16th, the Kaiser Permanente Washington Research Institute in Seattle has begun human testing on an experimental vaccine. And an immunologist at Johns Hopkins University is experimenting with the use of antibodies from recovered COVID-19 patients for use in a potential treatment of the virus. Australian researchers at the University of Queensland's Centre for Clinical Research have developed 2 drugs which wiped out all traces of the disease in test tubes, and they're now beginning testing on a nationwide trial. And Dutch and Canadian researchers have collaborated and managed to isolate the agent responsible for the spread of COVID-19, which will give researchers around the world better insights into the biology, evolution, and clinical shedding of the virus, and hopefully speed up the development of treatments and vaccines, as well as help researchers to develop better diagnostic testing. This is what we as humans can accomplish when we value and invest in science, when we work together to solve the greatest problems facing the human race. We will overcome. We can accomplish great things, and we can make prompt and effective progress. But before you take that for granted, I'd like to shine a little bit of light on the alternative pathway before us. The US religious response in the last month of this outbreak has been interesting. We've seen religious pseudoscience rear its ugly head in an unprecedented way. As the National Institutes of Health was predicting that as many as potentially 1.5 million deaths in the US alone could occur if drastic measures weren't taken, and as the CDC was begging people to stay home and practice social distancing, how were church leaders responding? Well, the author, international public speaker, and self-proclaimed apostolic prophet, Jennifer LeClaire, encouraged her congregation to not heed the CDC's advice, but to gather together in prayer, because We don't run away and isolate ourselves and quarantine ourselves and sit in our houses simply because we're afraid. We run to the church and we take authority over this demonic entity that's invading our city. And she went on to say that we get all of us here praying together, and we ain't none of us gonna get attacked by this dumb thing. Right, okay? But she was far from the only pastor with such catastrophically stupid faith-based advice. And as unemployment has begun to skyrocket, who's been there to bilk the desperate out of their last dime other than multimillionaire prosperity doctrine preachers like Trump's evangelical advisor, Kenneth Copeland, who told his viewers that whatever you do, don't you stop tithing. And the guy has multiple jets. How else is he gonna be able to pay for them? Or Trump's other multimillionaire spiritual advisor, Paula White, who painted her church as the essential hospital for the spiritually sick before asking her increasingly unemployed congregants to send her $91 donations or just $9 or whatever the Lord tells you to give. Meanwhile, she lives in a mansion. Thousands of pastors forgetting about the Black Death, bubonic plague, Spanish flu, smallpox, polio, SARS, MERS, H1N1, Ebola, etc., which we have survived all of, have warned their congregations that this right here is the end times, which totally didn't instill panic in anyone. At least, though, Pastor Chuck Pierce was there to reassure people that this wasn't the end times, just yet at least, because he's a prophet and God has shown him at least through the year 2026. This would almost be comical if so many people weren't so tragically affected by holy incompetence. And it's not just in the US. This religious menagerie isn't just limited to the borders of the United States. Known for its Young Earth Creationist Museum's life-size Noah's Ark recreations and Appalachian snake-handling pastors, religious incompetence and scientific illiteracy is a global pandemic. As far-flung as South Africa, just yesterday, spiritual healers were going door-to-door distributing their flyers for their traditional herbalist snake oil salesman services and telling people that if you're out of work because of COVID, can't afford to go to a hospital, no worries. For just a small fee, you can obtain a protection of charms, which is about as effective as a bulletproof vest made entirely of saran wrap. As the coronavirus spread through South Korea, Pastor Lee Man-hee, claiming to be the second coming of Jesus, decided to throw caution to the wind and ignore safety advisories. After his congregation was exposed to the virus, he then thwarted efforts to stop its spread by refusing to hand over a list of his church's members to the authorities. At the beginning of the month, over 60% of the 4,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Korea were members of his cult. He blamed the spread of the disease on evil. I agree. And as the coronavirus ravaged the Indian city of Qom, their local cleric Ayatollah Tabrizian denounced Western medicine as un-Islamic and joined the Hunbots of the MLM world recommending the halal alternative, smearing essential oils on your anus. Which would be hilarious, except for the fact that in the wake of this pseudoscientific religious advice, the virus has become such a problem in Iran that now someone is dying of COVID-19 every 10 minutes there. But at least grandma's corpse will smell like violet leaf oil. Meanwhile, Orthodox Jews in Beit Shemesh, Israel, ignored rules about social distancing. Hundreds of school kids gathered together declaring, "We're not scared," and sexist religious posters outside blamed the pandemic on their women wearing wigs made entirely of non-Jewish hair. How incredibly unkosher. But it's not just the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians. As we hunker down in our homes around the world trying to weather the storm and not spread the disease, Mormon congregations told their missionaries that this was an excellent time to go catch people in their homes and encouraged missionaries to go door to door knocking, even calling on some of their most vulnerable elderly patriarchs to bounce home to home, delivering blessings. We don't want them to spread their blessings to us. But nonetheless, they continue to take part in what I'm dubbing the Lord's contagion. As hundreds of thousands contract the potentially life-ending virus, their loved ones turn to God with prayers of intercession. If they recover, he's clearly good, loving, and gracious. If they die, well, he's just being mysterious again. The virus kills indiscriminately, though. It doesn't care what faith or creed you are. It doesn't care which gods you pray to. The only thing that's stopping it is scientific research into cures and vaccines, and the spread of science-based preventative information. And don't think you get a pass, Hindus. As India quarantined itself off from the rest of the world, Hindu activists held cow urine drinking parties where they guzzled the sacred kidney elixir of their bovine brethren. Holy cow. And one of the countries that was hit hardest by the virus has been Italy. As the health departments there took drastic measures to curb the COVID outbreak, the Pope, the world's most useless geriatric billionaire, staring down at the empty streets of the Vatican, assured Catholics around the world that he had met with God on his pilgrimage down the street to no less than 2 different churches, where he asked God to please stop the virus now. Unfortunately, per usual, God seems to be practicing social distancing. When thrust under the blacklight of scrutiny, we see the harmful traces of religious pseudoscience everywhere. And we have to ask ourselves, how have we been so complacent and comfortable with the spread of this mind virus? Religious insanity is a global pandemic. I understand that people are scared and they want reassurance in these uncertain times that things are going to be okay. People turn to prophets and psychics for words of insight about what the future holds, and time again, they're disappointed by charlatans and swindlers. But humanity will pull through this. We're strong and resilient. And what's more, we have a tremendous chance to learn from this going forward. This right here is an inflection point, a learning opportunity. As humanity bands together to find a cure and overcome this pandemic ravaging our planet, perhaps the loved ones that we lose won't have to die in vain. If and only if we can emerge from this with valuable lessons learned about the failure of spiritual superstition, prayer, and faith healing, and the danger of pseudoscience and religious dogma, exiting this dark tunnel with a newfound appreciation of the importance of scientific literacy and for our collective investment in education, medicine, vaccines, and other research and development initiatives. This is the only sane path forward. The alternative is grim. If we shamefully refuse to learn from past mistakes, we doom ourselves to swan dive our heads back into the dark age sand dunes, shoulder deep in religious and superstitious insanity. It's an easy choice. Human lives and the rate of human progress hang in the balance. The consequences have never been more dire, but the simultaneously empowering and terrifying reality is that this vital choice for humanity's trajectory is entirely up to us.
Hello, my fellow atheists. Welcome to Atheist Day. This is David Oliverio, the preaching humanist. My job is to educate people about secular humanism, promoting and advancing a beautiful worldview that is far above and beyond theistic religion. It is an alternative. So we as atheists, it is time for us to let other people know what we believe in rather than what we don't believe in. So my message is to promote this thing we call secular humanism for we who identify as atheists. So if you're an atheist and you're tired of people coming up to you and you have dialogue with people and they ask you, if you don't believe in God, then what do you believe in? You must believe in nothing. Well, through the many years of activism and talking to believers and non-believers, I have noticed that they do not understand the concept that you can have a fulfilled life, and we do believe in many wonderful things. Number one, we believe in love. Love is not a Christian virtue only. It is not a godly or a biblical or religious virtue. It is human. No God, no Bible, no Jesus, no religion is needed to define love nor to explain love. We have it innate in us as social animals. Number two, we believe in ethics and morals. How many times do we get that from people? If you're an atheist, how can you be moral and ethical? Why? We know because ethical values are derived from human need and human interest. and tested by experience and the all-important consequences. We understand the concept of ethics and morals. We have it in us. Not long ago, at the Atheist community of Austin booth, I and others have set up a booth at Market Days in Georgetown, Texas. I hold up my signs, and one of the signs I had says, secular humanism, good and moral without God, without belief in a God. A man about 30, 40 feet away, I get this all the time, looked at me, yelled out, no way that'll ever happen. And I said, what is that, sir? He said, you cannot be good without God. Only God and Jesus is good. And of course, as I always do, I answered him and said, with a smile on my face, I said, sir, you're wrong. We just got finished feeding homeless people before we came out here to set up the table. We must let people know that we believe in ethics and morals. Now, churches are very, very good at answering existential questions that humans have. Well, how did we get here? What's the meaning in life? What's purpose in life? How do you find ethics and values and fulfillment and happiness and love and so forth without belief in a God? There's a particular church right down the street from the ACA studio, and they're brilliant marketers. I used to be one of those preachers in the 70s and 80s, and I remember that. When you drive down past their church, they have signs out there. And it says, you belong here. You are loved. If you come here, you will find meaning in life. You're going to be happy here. You'll have community. They're good at promoting and answering these questions. We have the same thing. We can answer them. We have something positive rather than talking about what we don't believe all the time. We need to tell them what we do believe in. We believe in having a fulfilled life, servicing other people. If there's a void in one's life, we don't have one of those God-shaped holes. That's what preachers like to talk about. Well, without Jesus, you got a God-shaped hole and you need to have fulfillment. We do have life fulfillment. Benefiting others, helping other people, finding things you love to do, and like icing on the cake, it makes it even better when you benefit and help other people. So we can have a fulfilled life. Number 4, we believe as atheists and secular humanists that humans are social by nature and find meaning in relationships. Another question they like to have. Well, how do you find meaning in life if you're an atheist? Let me quote from a very intelligent man, my friend Dr. Anthony Penn from Houston, a fellow atheist and a fellow secular humanist. The markers of meaningful existence are only measured within the context of something larger than yourself. Well, David, that sounds Christian. You sound like an old preacher again. Hey, we do that in reality. We have something to share with people. Now, one more thing. This is one that I get all the time. Well, David, you're an atheist. You can't be happy. There's no way you could be happy without having a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. We as atheists and we as secular humanists believe that benefiting society maximizes individual happiness. Yes, happiness and joy without belief in a God. I've seen it many times when people go out with me or others to feed homeless people, do whatever you can for others. It does make you feel good because we're social animals. It's in us to do that. Let me tell you a little story. And I run into people all the time when I'm out with activism. And not only that, in my day-to-day adventures, going out to my clients' homes and so forth. I went into an Apple store to get my iPhone fixed because I don't know a lot about technology. Most people know that. And I'm going to tell you a story about Apple Store Baptist Deacon. An Apple Store Baptist Deacon was on a mission. He was out to save souls and let them know about the light of Jesus Christ, right? So I walked in, make a long story short, And I told the young guy up front, I said, look, I'm an old dude. I don't know much about technology. Help me out here, young man. I made him laugh. So he went down and sat me at a table waiting for the next available employee to come help me with my lack of technology. And he sat me down with a table with about 6 or 7 youngsters, the millennials, right? And I like to be around them. They're smart. And I noticed there was a gentleman probably younger than me, but he was probably in his 40s or 50s. And he was telling this young person next to him about his relationship with his wife. He said, I'm blessed. I thank God for my relationship with my wife now of 20 years, whatever. So I looked at him. I said, good morning, sir. And he goes, hi. And he started it off on me. I knew where Apple Store Baptist Deacon was headed. And he said, yes, I have a relationship with my wife because of my relationship with God. And I went, here's an opportunity to share with this man. And I did. I said, well, sir, that's really great. I said, I'm sure you have a lot in common, but I and my sweetie pie Christine are about to get married. Now, this was this past summer. We got married. And I said, and we are both atheists. And I've never been happier. And I said that. He looked at me. He didn't like that. He said, sir, that is impossible. And I said, what is that, sir? What's so impossible? He said, it is impossible for an atheist to be happy. Well, I went on and I noticed I had a whole crowd of people. And knowing me with my preacher years ago, the more people, the better. So I said, sir, let me explain to you something. And I explained to him how you can find happiness in life, many ways, without belief in a God. So my fellow atheists, let's go out there and let our light of secular humanism shine. And let's tell people that there is something positive in this. It's not only what we don't believe. There are wonderful things that we believe. As humans, we have shared values and interests and ethics, even with believers. They don't know that. Let's go out there and tell them these things. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Hey everyone. Today, we celebrate our second International Atheist Day. And unlike last year, we're broadcasting from our homes. You see, the steps of the Texas State Capitol, where we're supposed to be, like so many other capitals, is empty right now, as we buckle down and weather the storm that is the COVID-19 coronavirus. I know I wasn't expecting this. I had a different speech planned for today, but that speech is going to have to wait for another time. Check your news feeds right now, and you'll find that the Jim Bakkers of the world are making a tidy profit off of our fears, selling us buckets of slop and cure-alls to those who are the most vulnerable among us. Because for just $29.95 each month, you can forgo your insurance, apparently. And that last paycheck that you got, well, that's not rent money, that's seed money. And planting that seed will multiply your wealth if you just give it to one of those shady-ass preachers and wish hard enough, apparently. It tastes bad to say. You see anti-vax groups passing along prayer chains like modern-day curanderas, burning incense to place a ward of protection over their homes. And all while thanking God, and not the people braving the outbreak to bring us essential services. You know, to those of you on the front lines of this outbreak, staffing overcrowded hospitals and clinics, stocking food and keeping the lights on, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. You're doing your part, and now we need to do ours. If you have availability in the coming weeks, please consider reaching out and volunteering with the Hotline Project by going to recoveringfromreligion.org. They will train you. You can be a listening ear for someone in need. And in doing so, be an active part of providing some of those resources that are desperately needed right now. And I've read the messages, and I'm in the forums. And so many people right now are having to stay with fundamentalist family members to get through this. So many people unable to come out as atheists because right now it is dangerous, especially now. You're fighting your own battle right now. We see it. And there's no shame in waiting until it's a safe time to come out. We'll be here. Promise. On YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Discord, and Reddit. I still see us. We're gathering. We're reaching out, unbound from the borders that are isolating us. Because when local communities can't gather, the atheist community of everywhere still does. And we're igniting that fire to see and lead the way to a better tomorrow. So if you've been planning on starting a podcast or a YouTube channel, now is an amazing time to get it started. Not only is it a great skill to learn, but we need more voices and we need them today. You get experience by trying. Don't worry about not having experience. I can tell you that helping others through becoming a content creator has been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. A community does not need to be large to be worthwhile, and your voice might resonate with someone that mine doesn't. And if it even helps just one person through a tough time, it's worth it. Because we need to be there to say that you are not alone. We don't need to leave our homes to make an impact. Hell, we don't even need to put on pants. We're still finding that comfortable place between overworking ourselves and sitting with nowhere to go during social isolation. Keep that passion alive and let your voice shine out. And let those voices be 1,000 beacons to let everyone know that while it may not feel that way, you're not alone. So let's make this time a vigil for the world that we still need to build. By holding accountable those people who can make a change. By demanding that they stick to evidence-based solutions when passing legislation. By illuminating bad ideas. By thanking those people who are working tirelessly to keep us safe. And by reminding everyone that human hands solve human problems. Let this Atheist Day be the one that helped you find your voice. Because I, for one, I can't wait to hear it.
The Secular Student Alliance supports high school and college organizations that seek to build a community based on secular values. All SSA chapters operate under the ideas of community, advocacy, service, and education. As founder and president of the Maverick Secular Society at UT Arlington, I know how valuable their support has been in growing our community from the ground up. Since day one of starting this organization, the SSA has been readily available to answer questions, provide feedback, and offer advice on how we can grow our community to the best it can be. They also provide us with swag, including pins, stickers, buttons, and informational secular brochures that we hand out on campus. They've helped us secure guest speakers, including Dan Barker from FFRF, and provide us with ongoing leadership trainings and opportunities. The SSA truly is an alliance of secular students dedicated to growing, collaborating, and advocating together.
Hey everybody, Objectively Dan here, and as you can tell, I'm not in the ACA studios. I'm actually filming this from my apartment. So the ACA was having some electrical stuff done this week, and it turns out the repairs weren't going to be done in time for us to be able to film Truth Wanted on Friday. So I'm recording this video ahead of time because, man, what a week it's been. I've heard so many conspiracy theories about the coronavirus, everything from it's a population bomb set up by China to a deliberate attack from the Democrats to make Donald Trump look bad. And I know there's a lot of misinformation going out there right now, but I think it's important to talk about what it means to be a skeptic in times like this, because I'm trying to figure out that role for myself. Probably like you guys, I've been feeling over the last couple of days like, man, there's a lot of stuff happening and it doesn't feel like I have a lot of control over what's going on. Like, I'm just one person. How can I, contribute to help out? Because I even feel anxious and scared about this situation myself sometimes, just thinking about it, because it's like, oh yeah, if I get it, I might be fine. But what about the people that I love that may be more susceptible? Or what's going to be the economic impact of this at the end? Are there going to be people like my friends or myself who aren't going to have the same kind of work that we usually do? What's going to happen? So I think for right now, the best thing we can do as skeptics is to look at the information coming to us critically and evaluate the sources that we have, and try to get as best of a clear picture as we can, because everybody's talking about this stuff and a lot of people have a lot of bad ideas, some of which has already killed people. There was a story from Iran where over 40 people drank alcohol, like pure alcohol, because they had heard that the coronavirus would be basically explicated from the body if you drank alcohol or something. Like, the misinformation really has an effect on people, and people's beliefs motivate them to do things that they wouldn't normally do. And we have to be the ones to think critically about this stuff. We have to be the ones to tell other people, hey, look, here's some other places you can look at that are saying differently. Here's some better sources than maybe what you're looking at that can are in general more reliable. Because like right now, we're definitely going through something, and things are going to be changing. But that doesn't mean that we have to panic. It doesn't mean that we can't still make decisions ourselves that are good for us based on the information that we get. So I just wanted to make this short video kind of, giving you guys something positive to think about, and a role that you can play in this situation that I'm trying to play myself. I'm definitely talking to the people that I work with and saying, hey, well, this is what this source is saying, and this is what's really going on. Because, again, I'm hearing a lot of ideas from people that just aren't true and can be demonstrably shown to not be true. And this shows Truth Wanted, right? Like, we want to know the truth. We want to be able to help people with figuring out how they can figure out the truth themselves. So I'm open on Twitter for DMs. If you guys want to talk to me about your fears. It's at ObjectivelyDan, and you can email me too. It's truthwanted@atheist-community.org, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this. But as of right now, the show for Friday the 20th is not going to happen. I'm not sure what's going to happen with future shows. Right now, the only reason why we couldn't do it was because of some electrical stuff. Didn't have to do anything with the coronavirus stuff. We'll see if Austin takes some more serious measures and we can't do anything like that. But for right now, we're still planning on making content for you guys. So just want to give you guys this quick update and a smile to remember to always keep wanting the truth, okay? Because there's good people out there in the world. I know it's kind of hard to see that sometimes, but there are good people who are willing to fight this and willing to fight the misinformation that's out there as well, to help people think rationally about this. Because the last thing we want to do is make decisions on bad information. So anyway, that's just my update on this. I'm Objectively Dan. Thank you guys for watching Truth Wanted, and I'll see you guys next time.
Hello, puppies and kittens. I'm sorry that on this annual celebration of Atheist Day, I could not be there in Austin to meet and sup with y'all in person, but I know you're all surviving the plague of our time. Damn it, dog. The dog is trying to remove the soul or squeaky thing out of its toy. I apologize. This thing is determined to ruin every type podcast I do. Anyway, as I said, I hope you're all surviving the plague of our time. And I know these conditions are unprecedented. What is with that dog? You want your own show? Go! For those of you wondering, it's a Great Pyrenees. Ah! Shut up! Damn. I know these conditions are unprecedented if you ignore the Spanish flu of a century ago, but like so many other things, the first time won't be the only time. We will face other similar trials, probably repeat. Honey, lock that dog up. What was I saying? Like so many things, the first time won't be the only time. We will face other similar trials probably repeatedly over the course of the next century or so, because climate change is a thing. It is anthropogenic, and there are consequences in our inability to see how things add up. But that's why we invented a religion that allows us to avoid all responsibility, where we don't have to actually help anyone. We can just literally wish upon a star that they'll accidentally get the help that they need, and that we don't have to actually donate money or effort to that end. Likewise, we don't have to be accountable for anything either. It doesn't matter if you serial molested 4 out of your 10 siblings, because if the judge is another wanna believer like you, then you might be able to avoid jail time if you just say that your magic imaginary friend has forgiven you. And why wouldn't he? He already knows exactly why you did all the stupid things that you do. He fully understands and accepts all your bullshit excuses because he is you. And that's why your own personal Jesus never knows more than you do. And he also believes the same falsehoods you do. If you thought that the First World War was fought in 1776, then your God thinks so too, because your God is just as stupid as you. That's why he hates everything that you hate. Man created God in his own image, and we put his word into his mouth in the scriptures that we scribed, telling us to be fruitful and multiply, to dominate and subdue the earth. Our sacred fables never said anything about implementing a different policy once we doubled the global population, as we did a century ago. And then that number doubled again. And then that number doubled again, just over the course of a single lifetime, such that the combination of our food and energy consumption is killing off the majority of plant and animal species on land or in the sea. If we allow willfully ignorant reality deniers to remain in charge, then the Anthropocene extinction event will likely rival even the great dying that divides the Permian and Triassic. Because our population growth is exponential, unsustainable, meaning that the more times like these are on the way, and it's likely to get much worse as different catalysts and calamities each demand their own unprecedented responses, which we have not yet devised. Don't ever get a great pair of knees. Not if you have a recording job. So, our beloved president fired our pandemic response team, saying that no one could have predicted that there would actually be a pandemic, except for whoever created a pandemic response team. I think they might have guessed that something like this would happen. But remember that Trump said that his pandemic, this pandemic, was a Chinese hoax. He said global warming was a Chinese hoax too. And the reality of that mistake will hit us even harder than this one already is. Interestingly, the reason that antibiotics work on bacteria but not on viruses is because bacteria is alive. It's biotic. But viruses don't quite qualify as life because they can't maintain the internal chemical balance known as homeostasis. Nor are they quite dead, because even though they're not quite alive, they can still be killed. So in a sense, this is a zombie apocalypse, one in which the undead can only be defeated by hoarding toilet paper. I'm luckier than most because I work from home. I no longer have to live off daily tips or cash payments like I used to. I've also been taking college classes online before every other student in the country was forced to. I'm taking classes from Arizona State University's School of Human Evolution and Social Change. Go Sun Devils. I went with ASU partly because I was named after a sun god, and partly because I thought it was appropriate that a seemingly satanic atheist activist should be a sun devil. This year, I took courses in archaeology, paleontology, primatology, cultural and physical anthropology, and now I'm taking courses distinguishing legitimate science from pseudo-archaeology. They're actually talking about all those fake fossils of giants that you might have seen pictures of but can't touch the real thing because there is no real thing. And this course also talks about at least one of Ron Wyatt's hoaxes. And not the one where he pretended to find the exact site of Jesus's crucifixion and his actual blood and the Ark of the Covenant all in the same place at the same time, but the one where he said that a pile of dirt on Mount Ararat was really Noah's Ark. If you've seen the images of it, that vaguely boat-shaped mound of mud at the Drupanar site is shaped like a canoe because snow melts and flows down either side. If you look for it, you can even find photos of another canoe-shaped ark close to the bigger one. Wyatt never mentions that one because his favorite fairy tale doesn't allow for it. So I'm sure to have fun with that class. And all of these classes have to refer to Charles Darwin for various reasons. And consequently, all of them also have to explain that a scientific theory is not just a drunken idea or a blind guess of baseless speculation like every revelation of religious truth always turns out to be. Instead, each of my college courses teaches that a scientific theory is an explanation of a body of facts, an explanation that has been rigorously tested and passed every test. In other words, a scientific theory is like a hypothesis that has been effectively proven by an overwhelming preponderance of evidence beyond reasonable doubt. Because they have to explain all that, they've also had to stress that accepting and understanding science doesn't mean that you can't still believe in a God if you really want to. It's just that biblical mythology cannot be a literal history of things that really happened as described, because none of those atrocious legends are evidently true, and most of them contradict everything we actually do know and can prove to be real. Some of these classes have even had to explain that the only way we can know anything at all is if we assume that the universe is real, rather than pretend that we're all figments of God's imagination, wherein nothing is real, including us, and therefore nothing means anything, and no one can ever really know anything either, not even the people who already believe in that particular God, as if such a thing was possible. It's not. But a lot of people like the idea that no one can really know anything because that means that they get to make believe in their favorite phantasm. But the rest of us would rather understand reality. So we're comfortable assuming that there is a reality or that reality is real, because even if everything is just an illusion, like in the Matrix, we still have to obey the laws of this particular video game, whether we're player characters or NPCs. It's still our reality. So there's effectively no difference between real and virtual in that hypothetical absurdity. And just remember that anything that exists outside our reality does not exist in reality. And if it exists beyond time, then at no time does it exist. I have to be pragmatic and assume that even if I assume that reality is real, as it evidently and logically is, especially given both Occam's and Hitchens' razors, that even if everything we perceive is only a virtual illusion, the fact remains that a line of footprints in the sand still means that someone walked there, and fossil bones are still evidence of an extinct animal, whether this reality is the real one or not. So there is neither purpose nor value in idealism. Honestly, there's no version of God that makes any sense or has any value, or that isn't somehow a contradiction of itself. Look at our current situation. We've got all these evangelical faith-healing churches voluntarily closing their doors because of a virus they know they can't cure. That's a clear admission that they know they're full of shit, that all this holiness is just make-believe by pretenders. Then, after enough people pointed out that little bit of hypocrisy, we have a few other churches offering to lay hands on hundreds of infected elderly, knowing that that's how this disease spread far and wide in the first place. It spread all over South Korea from a single church service. And here in the States, 45 people were infected in one service where they sprayed holy water into everyone's mouth using the same squirt gun. The Lord works in delirious ways. Ignorance and hypocrisy abound in religion, such that now we have even more faith healers pretending to heal people remotely through their TV screens, but still demanding that those people risk infection by physically going down to the church to slide their tithing under the door, because these self-appointed spokesmen for God want everyone to think that they really care about humanity. Not if you don't send that check to Paula the Great White Hypocrite, because she's the president's advisor to things no one ever actually knows anything about, and certainly not her ignorant, self-serving ass. Notice also that no one ever prophesied any of the unprecedented events that have ever happened in our lives. Hopefully most of us will make it through these unexpected challenges. I hope to get through this. I'm being careful. I'm also not going to complain too much, because if karma exists, maybe God is Rod Serling, and he wrote the Twilight Zone episodes that we're all living through. And most of all, understand that I'm not promoting hatred. I never have. No one cares what you hate, and neither should you. It's only the things that we love that will endear you in someone else's memory, and that's the nearest to immortality that we can hope for. I've always thought that a positive attitude helps maintain a healthy perspective, and that makes life more livable. So if you can't appreciate something positively, At least allow yourself to be impressed. I am.
Hello, my name is Christy Powell. I'm a gender and sexuality therapist here in Austin with Valence Counseling, and I help to host Secular Sexuality for the Atheist Experience Network, Thursdays at 7 Central. When I was a kid, my dad used to point out Darwin fish car decals as a preamble to a lecture on the evils of the world, which, to his mind, mostly boiled down to the Clintons' use of the United Nations to establish a new world order because of something child pornography. Conspiracy theories aside, he was strangely fascinated with the question of why atheists bother to announce their sins to the world, to hold rallies, to organize. What could they possibly have to offer the world? What would they even get together to talk about? After atheists are done rubbing their hands together and plotting the assault on Christmas, what was there to discuss and fellowship about? Did they really need to just sit around and consider how there still isn't a God? Even after my skepticism, my education in psychology, my love of queer films shook me loose from his line of thinking, I honestly wondered the same thing. Why do atheists form clubs and communities? Why not join a political movement or donate your 1%, your 10% to some sort of charity? For 25 years of Christianity, I'd been taught that religion was the enemy, that rules and creeds, rituals and command chains were all part of a ploy to distract us from a relationship with God. Atheism, just like Islam, Buddhism, Catholicism, and even most Christians, was seen as just another religion, another way of corrupting our innate desire for a connection to perfect love. Plenty of more eloquent, better informed speakers can debunk the idea of atheism as another world religion, but I always come back to those two ideas of organizing and connecting. Aside from our war on Christmas and our inexplicable love of Monty Python, what do atheists actually have in common? Why should we be activists together? For all the many reasons that people are naming, you should know that LGBT youth are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide. 40% of all trans adults report having made a suicide attempt. Queer Americans have nearly double the average unemployment rate and twice the food insecurity that the rest of America faces. In countries all around the world, people still face a lack of marriage access, can be kept from work, from being out, from organizing, from being safe. Every day in my counseling office, I work with people who are in the minority because of who they love, how they dress or present to the world. And in every one of those conversations, I hear about people being hurt because of some unquestioned and unchallenged idea of right and wrong, of good and evil. When we come together as a community of atheists, we put pressure on our world to make decisions, to make policies based not on our guts or our spirit or our divine instructions, but based on our understanding. We challenge the world to ask itself, why and how do you know? To do away with careless assumptions and magical thinking. When atheists join their voices together, we remind the world that they aren't going to get to someday stand in front of some home team deity to justify their actions. They're standing in front of their fellow man now. Each of us is responsible not to God or to some imaginary idea of right and wrong or to some magical book, but to each other. When atheists can organize, we can remind the world that judgment isn't some far-off day of reckoning, that we are, all of us, being held accountable for the way we treat our children, our poor, our vulnerable, our fellow humans. And when we organize into a community, we can find connection. We can actually create a piece of that divinity that our species has sacrificed so much for in the name of God by finding love and intimacy and connection right here with one another. Even at a time when we feel most isolated, we can pull together and find closeness and purpose without lying to ourselves or to one another. Thank you for being a part of this community and for helping us to act towards a better world.
Hi, I'm Matt Dillahunty, president of the Atheist Community of Austin and host of the Atheist Experience TV show. And while I hoped to be doing this talk on the steps of the Capitol in Austin, instead I'm shooting it from my backyard where I'm kind of in a little bit of a quarantine. But as I noted in the introduction to this event earlier, we will not be stopped. Over the 15 years that I've hosted the Atheist Experience, I've had the opportunity to interact with many people from all around the world. I've heard from people who are theists and who wish to have conversations. Some of them only want to preach. Some of them seem incapable of having conversations, and some of them are genuinely interested in moving the conversation forward. I want to talk to those people today, the people who are potentially allies of the godless. In the years that I've done this show, in the years that I've participated in the atheist community, I've also had the opportunity to hear from many atheists who feel alone, who feel ostracized. I've dealt with couples who have changed their religious views, or one of the partners has changed their religious views, and they're dealing with the stress this has put on their relationship. I've dealt with couples who are dealing with this with respect to how they should raise their children. On a regular basis, we get telephone calls from people who, no longer having a religious belief, but once having such a belief, now have to deal with, how do I interact with my family members? Will they still love me? Will they toss me aside? There are a number of great organizations like Recovering from Religion that have been established, and individual communities like the Atheist Community of Austin, which are here as landing places for people who, after giving up religion or after having decided that they need to participate in a community of people who have no religion, needed places like that. I've spoken to children who've been thrown out of their homes, teenagers ostracized by their parents, had their bags and belongings tossed out into the front yard, where we had to find new homes for them to live in because the parents would not tolerate an atheist child. Through the course of all these conversations, it's become clear that while I live in an incredibly prosperous, privileged country where I don't have to suffer and I don't have to fear reprisal when I speak my mind, that we still have a long way to go. I do the show from Austin, Texas. I don't have any great fear that religious zealots are going to come storming into the building and, beat me up. Around the world, that's not the same. There are individuals who merely for posting a non-religious Facebook message or blog post legitimately fear for their lives. In my country, the fear is of being alone. The fear is of being viewed as someone unworthy of love, unworthy of family, unworthy of community. And that's why we in the atheist community will continue to build communities, continue to provide places for people to interact. The ostracizing that takes place doesn't happen with every religious identity equally. Not everyone fears what their family's going to say. But it's sufficient enough that it impacts whether or not an atheist is likely to get elected to office, whether or not secular views are taken seriously in legislation, despite the fact that in the United States, we have in our Constitution, in the law, a secular system, perhaps the first potentially glorious secular government, where you are free to hold your religious views, you are free to practice your religious views, and the only imposition from the government on your religious actions is when they come in conflict with other people's rights. One of the biggest problems, though, is that the majority religions aren't in any way forced or expected to view things in that light by virtue of their might, their popularity. They just presume that the rest of the world needs to act the way they want the world to act. We have children who are told that they are broken, that they're born sinful, that they're destined to hell. I've heard from people in their 70s who, despite being an atheist for decades, still wake up from nightmares of a hell they were taught to believe in when they were just children. We produce a TV show where people can call in, have those conversations. Some of them go well, some of them don't go particularly well. I travel the country doing lectures and debates, debating apologists from every corner of the globe. Some of those conversations are productive, some of them aren't. But that's the academic portion of this. It's the people portion that my secular humanism drives me to address. The people who are ostracized, the people who are made to suffer mental anguish, physical anguish, and even the fear of death. You are not broken. You are not bad. You are not immoral. You are not inferior. You are none of those things merely because you are not convinced of one of the many shared cultural delusions that our societies prop up as the pinnacles of virtue. Their claim that they have some divine right and superly imposed morality. Any of us who don't share a God as a foundation are somehow repugnant. Somehow God has given us over to a reprobate mind. We're broken. We are inferior. We are immoral. It doesn't matter what we do. As the psalm said, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They can do no good thing. Ancient holy texts have mistreated, misrepresented, and maligned non-believers from the beginning. And while it may not feel like it, religious individuals are the true first-tier victims of religion. The oppression that they impose is a manifestation of their fears and their insecurities. Their divisive us and them actions deserve our unified opposition in support of equality. And they, on a personal level, deserve our pity and compassion. This isn't a call for meekness. I'm not the meek atheist, and anyone who's seen the show can attest to that. You are correct to be angry at what has been done on behalf of religious identity. You should argue. You should engage. You should be passionate and be strong and unflinching in your support of equality and an end to religious privilege and religious oppression. That righteous anger, tempered with compassion, is the key to helping them out of the dark mire, and then their hands, instead of being folded in useless prayer, formed into a fist, or fashioning the weapons and words used to oppress the next generation of non-believers, can be the hands that help us, help others, live in a better world tomorrow. We've already started. We've built communities. We've produced content. We have engaged. We have worked to elect representatives that will represent all of us fairly. I would never advocate legislation to forcefully end religion, but legislation that ends religious oppression and religious privilege is a must. I would never engage with someone and desperately try to convince them that their religion is wrong unless they were willing to have the conversation. On our show, we make outgoing calls. We don't make outgoing calls. We take calls as they come in. But we need atheists internationally to stand up for equality, to advocate for atheist normalcy so that people know that their next door neighbor, who they like, is a non-believer and isn't a monster. And so that our religious friends, relatives, and neighbors can be freed of the dogma and doctrines that have kept the world shackled for far too long. Please, atheists around the world, be out and be outspoken. And religious individuals who are interested in equality and fairness and discussion, join with us in making sure that while everyone is free to practice their beliefs to the extent that they don't interfere with other people's lives, we are all working towards a truly better tomorrow, where I never have to have another conversation with a 15-year-old kicked out of his home and community desperate to find a new place for that kid to live just because his parents are the victims of religious dogma and are spreading that bigotry on. Thank you.
Happy International Atheist Day 2020. I'm sorry we couldn't be together in person, but our community made the right call and moved the event online. There are more people on the internet anyway. And thanks to this whole self-quarantine situation, I've got a captive audience. So buckle up, because you're about to listen to a millennial discuss the importance of labels. One of the first things I realized after leaving my Christian faith was how amazing the human brain is. When I was a Christian, I was terrified of my brain. It was full of dangerous thoughts, lustful desires, and insufficient answers to important questions. You know the verse, take every thought captive, yada yada. Now that I'm an atheist, though, I'm endlessly fascinated by the power of the brain. After all, brains create gods. One of the most important elements of the brain is its ability to categorize things. Our ability to recognize each other, to predict outcomes, to read literature and appreciate art, to build community, is a result of this superpower. And it is a superpower. Brains are better at categorizing than they are at almost anything else, and they do so at a subconscious level. When we do become aware of it, and when we harness it for our own ends, it becomes even more powerful. But we know this. Religions have been doing this for a very long time, and to great success. They categorize things into very simple, dogmatic boxes, and then they label those boxes. Right and wrong, good and evil, dark and light, saved and damned. Going outside those boxes is literally unthinkable. If you are not one, then you are by default the other. You know the verse, "He who is not with me is against me." The practice of labeling other people is dangerous. The most horrendous atrocities in history were predicated on this practice. Those in the halls of power labeling the people who stood outside. Sometimes it was intentional, sometimes it was instinctual, and often it was a combination of both, but no matter what the motive was, the outcome was always the same: disenfranchisement, discrimination, suppression, and a lack of equality. Atheists have experienced this for a long time and continue to this day. Here in America, we are underrepresented in our government bodies. We are routinely erased from the social and political spheres we occupy, and our ways of life are encroached on daily by religious overreach at both the state and federal levels. Depending on where we live, we are called dangerous, perverted, demonic. We are shunned from our communities, kicked out of our houses. Internationally, the story gets even more grim. If you are unlucky enough to be an atheist in some countries, your citizenship can be revoked. You can be beaten, kidnapped, imprisoned, even executed by your own government, simply for thinking freely. Now, considering the painful experiences with labels that atheists have had, it makes sense why we would instinctively reject them. Labels are dangerous. They cause division. They encourage myopic thinking and stymie independent perception. And this is all true when labels are applied to us by others. But there's a whole other side to this story, one which we would be foolish to ignore: the power of labels to create movements and demand attention. We often make fun of Christians for their many denominations. And anyone who comes from a religious background knows you aren't just a Christian, right? You're a Protestant or a Catholic or a Mormon. You're a Methodist or an Episcopalian or a Presbyterian or a Southern Baptist or a non-denominational follower of Jesus Christ, like I was. But when it comes time to be counted, to exert their will on the rest of the world, they know how to let go of those differences and stand together as Christians, as theists. That's the label they use to get shit done. And it works. Us? We're also not just one thing. We're agnostics, free thinkers, skeptics, secular humanists, Satanists, brights, and religious nuns, to name just a few. But until we have that banner to unite under, until we have that one label that when push comes to shove we can stand behind and shout with one voice, then we're going to remain scattered, uncountable, and powerless to exert our influence to change the world. And I'm not saying that atheist has to be the label we use, but it is a good one. It's honest, it's straightforward, it's inclusive, and maybe most notably, it strikes fear into the hearts of our opposition. If they are going to make us into monsters who possess supernatural powers of darkness, I say, why don't we use that to our advantage? They've given us a lot of power with this label. Power we didn't ask for and frankly we don't want. But you know the verse. With great power comes great responsibility. Perhaps the most important thing we can do with this power is to make something necessary and beautiful. A world that does not, cannot, hide behind holy edicts to mask hate and fear. And maybe in the future, we can get to a place where each one of us will be known only for our unique selves, leaving labels far behind. I would like to work towards that future. But we aren't there yet. I know that's an exhausting thing to hear. We always seem to be not quite there, and we're tired of almost. I get it. But we need to play by the rules that society has set up, the rules that are supported by our evolutionary psychology. Until this future comes to pass, we are fighting against those who would like nothing better than to keep those boxes, that binary kind of thinking, firmly in place. We need to organize. But before we can do that, we need to categorize. We are atheists. We are a community. And we will be counted.
Hey, I'm Seth Andrews. I'm host of thethinkingatheist.com. The Thinking Atheist is not a person. It's an idea. I'm a former evangelical. I came out of a faith culture. Fake it till you make it. Faith over knowledge. And now here on the other side of the looking glass, I want to pursue knowledge. And that's what the Thinking Atheist represents. Let's pursue the evidence. Let's use our brains, use reason. Let's think about these things. I've been thinking a lot about the theocrats in power as we approach the 2020 election. And here on Atheist Day 2020, I wanted to dwell a little bit on some of the invocations that we give from the Constitution and the Founding Fathers. We talk a lot about state-church separation. We don't always understand where some of these things come from. So for just a few minutes, here's kind of a layman's look at the backstory. And I want to start by going back in time. It's the 7th of October, 1801. Thomas Jefferson, newly elected president, right? The ink on the Constitution's not even dry yet. The American experiment still very fresh. And there was a group called the Danbury Baptists, and they were a smaller denomination of Baptists, and they were nervous. They were nervous that they were going to be discriminated against by the larger group of Baptists called the Congregationalists, right? We don't want to become second-class citizens. It's all kind of new out there. We don't know what's happening. Let's write a letter to Thomas Jefferson, and let's get some assurances that we'll still have a seat at the table. Right? We won't be discriminated against because we are a minority religion. And so they wrote this famous letter to Jefferson. They said these words, "Our sentiments are uniformly on the side of religious liberty." And they were using the words religious liberty in the accurate context, right? We want to be able to practice our faith and do our thing and interpret the Bible in this particular way without experiencing religious discrimination here in the United States. And so Thomas Jefferson wrote the famous reply, the letter to the Danbury Baptist, where he said this: "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people, who declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, this building a wall of separation between church and state." There it is, right? The line that we so often go to. Thomas Jefferson invoking the wall of separation between church and state. Pulpit preachers love to invoke Thomas Jefferson. I've never understood this. Like, Thomas Jefferson is the same guy who was called by Federalists a howling atheist because of his strong criticisms of organized religion, even organized Christianity. Thomas Jefferson, who once described himself as being of a sect by myself as far as I know, meaning he didn't line up with any other orthodoxies. He was kind of doing his own thing, marching to his own tune. This is the same Thomas Jefferson who is responsible for the Jefferson Bible. Thomas Jefferson took the early incarnation of an X-Acto knife, I guess, or razor blade, and he went through and sliced out all of the supernatural stuff, including Jesus's miracles and resurrection. Just cut them out of the Bible. And this Bible is currently on display. You can go see it at the Smithsonian, right? How would the theocrats respond to that Thomas Jefferson, who essentially cut the supernatural Jesus out of the Bible because he said, well, Christ had some good teachings, but there's no real good reason to support any of this magical stuff, right? You don't hear about that Jefferson from the Christian nationalists and the evangelicals and the pulpit preachers and the theocrats. Thomas Jefferson wrote a famous letter to John Adams. He said, "When once we quit the basis of sensation, all is in the wind. To talk of immaterial existences is to talk of nothings. To say that the human soul, angels, God are immaterial is to say they're nothings. Or that there is no God, no angels, no soul. I cannot reason otherwise. But I believe I'm supported in my creed of materialism by Locke, Traci, and Stewart." Of course, Thomas Jefferson would not have mandated a specific religion, his personal religion, whatever that was, and we are convinced he was a deistic and perhaps held to a deistic God. And he was right in line with his presidential predecessor, John Adams, who had signed his name to the Treaty of Tripoli. We hear the Treaty of Tripoli talked about quite a bit. Here's the context behind that. We used to run shipping lanes around Tripoli, which is now modern-day Libya. And we once, before we broke with Britain, enjoyed the protection of Britain against piracy. But once we broke with Britain and began the American experiments after the Revolutionary War, we didn't have those protections against piracy, and so we needed protections guaranteed for our ships in the region, and we formulated the Treaty of Tripoli. But Tripoli was nervous. A Muslim-majority population worried that we were going to come in and colonize, try to take over, Americanize, take away their Muslim faith, whatever. And they wanted assurances, and that's exactly what the United States did. We put together the Treaty of Tripoli with this famous quotation. It says, "As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims. And as the said states never entered into any war or act of hostility against any Muslim nation, it's declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries." There it is in black and white, right? John Adams is saying, we're not a Christian nation. And don't worry about us. We're not coming to Christianize Tripoli. Thomas Jefferson's successor, James Madison, was a huge critic of organized religion. He opposed a bill that had come out in 1785. They wanted to use taxpayer money to teach Christianity in public schools. It was James Madison who publicly opposed that. He opposed this dangerous abuse of power because religion can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. You can't mandate a religion. This is a private and personal affair. It doesn't belong in the public schools. Thomas Paine, much like Thomas Jefferson, he often referenced God in the most deistic sense. He wrote a series of pamphlets called The Age of Reason, came out in the late 1700s and in the early 1800s. And he strongly attacked the institution of the Christian church and organized religion. He famously called Christianity a fable. This is Thomas Paine. He wrote in The Age of Reason, the study of theology as it stands in Christian churches is the study of nothing. It is founded on nothing. It rests on no principles, it proceeds by no authorities, it has no data, it can demonstrate nothing, and it admits of no conclusion. Benjamin Franklin, he may have believed in a deistic God, but he was a longtime critic of organized religion. He was often writing these parodies of Puritan intolerance among the colonies, and instead he wanted to promote human goodness. Right? Human goodness. He famously said, vital religion has always suffered when orthodoxy is more regarded than virtue. Right? This is humanism. Right? Your virtue, your morality, your attitudes, actions, and deeds toward your fellow men and women, these are the most important things, not the orthodoxy, not the dogma. That's humanism. So flash forward. 2018, in the month of June, Pastor Robert Jeffress of First Baptist Church, Dallas, Texas, mega pastor here in the United States, does a famous sermon broadcast worldwide called America is a Christian Nation. And Pastor Jeffress said this:
America was not founded as a nation that is neutral toward Christianity. America was founded as a Christian nation.
Now, he's really slippery here because he was saying that Thomas Jefferson didn't promote or endorse a governmental religion, but he did endorse a governmental faith. Guess which faith Pastor Jeffress is talking about? All right, Christianity, of course. Christian privilege, Christian nationalism. Interesting that Pastor Jeffress is part of Donald Trump's Evangelical Advisory Board. Why does a secular, state church separated government have an evangelical advisory board? Well, this is a really good question. Of course, we see the evangelicals all over the current administration. Paula White, con artist, scam artist, evangelist Paula White. She's at the inauguration praying for Donald Trump, endorsing him, giving God's endorsement. You've got Franklin Graham at the inauguration. In his prayer, he said this:
Mr. President, in the Bible, rain is a sign of God's blessing. And it started to rain, Mr. President, when you came to the platform.
Now, what's most likely? In the month of January in Washington, where it rains 9 days on the average out of every 30, is it most likely that God rained down divine baptism on Donald Trump, or that it occasionally rains in Washington, D.C., right? But this is what we're facing. You've got Energy Secretary Rick Perry, who is calling Donald Trump the chosen one. You've got John Hagee, mega pastor from Texas, of course. He's talking about a Christian nation and how Trump has been brought to us. By the way, Hagee is a Zionist. He's a Christian Zionist, which is part of an end times narrative where the United States endorses Israel and the sanctity, the sovereign nation of Israel, is part of the book of Revelation, which precedes the end times. This is all bringing Jesus' return. And this is a terrifying notion that's echoed even within the Trump administration's cabinet members and staff. You've got Mike Pompeo, U.S. Secretary of State, saying that Donald Trump may have been brought up to power by God, like the Queen Esther of the Bible, to protect and endorse the Jews as part of the biblical narrative. You've got Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, saying that the public school system is actually there to advance God's kingdom, her specific God. We're not talking about Allah or Krishna, right? We're talking about her specific pet deity with a proper name. You've got Project Blitz, this massive effort to change the laws to favor a Christian nation and Christian nationalist with hundreds of bills, exemptions from civil rights laws, assaults on women's reproductive health. They're trying to mandate the Bible and Christian prayers in public schools, that kind of thing. You've got Attorney General William Barr. He recently gave a speech at the National Association of Religious Broadcasters, and he was talking about this attack, this assault by the secularists on religious liberty or religious freedom. This is not being used in the way that the Danbury Baptist used it. That phrase, religious liberty, is kind of a conversation stopper these days. If you say, well, you're attacking my liberty, you're attacking my constitutional right to believe, which is not the case at all. Right? We're not saying William Barr can't have and hold a personal religious faith. We're saying you can't make it rule of law and mandate that faith to everybody else. And yet that is what's happening right now in the Trump administration. That is why the 2020 elections are so critical. It's not about whether you love the Democratic candidate. It's whether or not one party over another favors Christian nationalism, which is anti-constitution and not representative of an America where we're seeing the rise of the nones, the non-religious. We are seeing an exponential growth of people who are not necessarily atheist, but they certainly aren't religious, and especially aren't Christian. They deserve a government that represents them, that protects the state church line, that allows people to have and hold any religious faith or none, but does not mandate it as part of a national narrative. We need a government that does not have an evangelical advisory board pitching a specific religion. We need a constitutional government that respects the writings of our founding fathers and the ideas on which this country was based, right? They fought and bled and died for that specific wall to be built and enforced. And it's time for us to stand up, to be activist, and to vote however we can, to demonstrate however we can, to resist the Christian nationalist tide in the United States. They do not get a seat at the head of the table. They must share the table with the rest of us. My friend and constitutional attorney Andrew Seidel at the Freedom from Religion Foundation wrote this tweet back in December. He said, "Dear white evangelicals, we're not coming for your rights. We're coming for your privilege. You'll be able to worship as you see fit, so long as you don't use government power to promote your religion or use your religion to violate another's rights." That pretty much sums it up, right? We're not coming for your rights, but we are coming for your privilege. And this notion that America belongs to Christianity is not just immoral, it's not just factually wrong, it's not just unconstitutional. It is, in fact, un-American. Thanks so much for watching.